So Volume 1 NCC compliance check for 83. Have the NCC, you've still got the drawings, and have the checklist. Now on the top of the checklist, the first thing you'll see at the heading is a proposed building classification. So the first thing we need to do is just confirm the building class, make sure that we've got the right types of use, so we pick the right rules. So for 81, it was very clearly Class 1A and 10A. For Class 82, it was wholly Class 2. We had some storage areas and some car parking, but that's all picked up in the same classification. For this one, it's a mixed use because we've got office space and something else. So we've already got a bit of an idea of what the client will be using it for. There's a loading bay where electricians who are wholesale customers of this investor or this developer, wholesale customers will come and buy products at a wholesale price and take them and use them to build into projects. So wiring, globes, light fittings, GPO plates, the general purpose outlet plates, PowerPoint outlet plates, data points, things like that. All the equipment that an electrician would need to do commercial or residential electrical work. Then there's an office out the front, and there's a little expectation for them to be able to sell some of those products to the public at a retail price. So they pay a little bit more because it's including sales tax. And you might be able to buy a few fixtures and fittings yourself, batteries, globes, obviously would be the biggest one. Globes are a big sale. And then you've got the odd light fitting or things for people to be able to fix up their own homes if they want to, retail. So a much smaller aspect of the building, but still there nonetheless. And then there's office spaces to be able to do that work. So the staff that are picking the products off the shelves and putting in the trucks in the loading bay will work out in the warehouse area, and they'll need ablutions. And then there's office staff that would organise the contracts with the wholesalers and pay the bills. Typically when you're a wholesale customer, you don't make a transaction financially at that time. You simply say what you want, but the purchase order is organised through the office and you sign for what you've received. And then the bill goes to the contractor's office to pay on a monthly basis. So there's no cash taking place out the back, whereas the retail customers are more likely to pay by EFTPOS or cash or credit card. So there's a couple of different transactions going there. So there'll be office staff. There's probably a sales manager and administration and somebody to run the front desk. How does that sound? So thinking about that kind of use, if we go to the different classifications, we need to figure out what that is. So it's definitely not anything residential. We want to skip well past 1, 2, 3 and 4. It's got nothing to do with those at all. There's no living in Zone GI, General Industry for Planning. They don't want anybody living there. So there can't be any bedrooms, none. It's too noisy. That's why it's Zone General Industry. So 5 is an office building used for professional or commercial purposes, excluding buildings of Class 6, 7, 8 or 9. So it's just an office. If it was just an office, it would be 5. But perhaps it's 6, 7, 8 or 9 instead. 6 is a shop or other building for the sale of goods by retail or the supply of services direct to the public. So it has here, D says market or sale room, showroom or service station. So we might just mentally bookmark that, just think, oh yeah, that sounds like it could be us, but we'll keep looking just to see if there's anything better. Then Class 7 is either a car park, or 7B is for storage or display of goods or produce for sale by wholesale. That definitely sounds like us, doesn't it? That's definitely our back area, isn't it? So 7B is a definite. Then we'll just make sure there's nothing better than 6, and we'll just keep looking. So Class 8, a laboratory, or for processing or the production and assembling of goods. We're not assembling anything, we're just buying the parts and taking them away. So 8 doesn't really apply. If we were manufacturing something to sell as a finished product, that would be different. But we're not really doing that, we're just giving the parts, wiring and plugs and globes and what have you. 9 is about healthcare and public buildings, assemblies and aged care, definitely not that. And 10 is non-habitable. So 7B and 6, you have to be just careful. I was about to say 6D, I've made this mistake. See how 7 has an A and a B in bold here? 7B is actually a class, but D is simply just part of 6. So it's not 6D like 7B is 7B. Can you see that there? 6 is just a class on its own. So it'll be 6 and 7B. Now what was the rule about mixed use? How much of one use do you have to have before it becomes its own compared to the rest? What was the percentage cutoff? Do you remember?
Said it was 10%.
10%, exactly. So is the office greater or less than 10% of the whole building?
It's greater.
So it was 714 square metres in total, and the office is 84 square metres. So what is 84 as a percentage of 714?
11.
Is it? Yeah.
Because if it's
So the, yep, so the,
71.4.
so the office is 84 square metres. The whole building is 714 square metres. So if the office was less than 71.4 square metres, because that's 10% of the total, then it would be less than 10% of the total, and the mixed use would get incorporated by the majority, which would be our 7B. So even the office would be treated like 7B in the NCC. But it's just over. Happy to repeat it. How'd you go, Andy? You've got that? Yeah, write it down. So mixed use is a rule where if one use is less than 10% of the overall building, it can be absorbed, assimilated by the main use. And you can just treat the whole building like the one use. But it has to be 10% or less of the overall for that to qualify. And this one is just slightly larger. So the whole building is 714 square metres. 10% of that is 71.4 square metres. But our office is 84 square metres. So it's slightly greater than 10%, and thus this mixed use concession doesn't apply, and we still have to treat the office as its own space for the NCC. So we have 2 sets of clauses to check all the way through the NCC. Is the checklist correct? Have they got the right heading at the top? Is it correct?
Yeah.
Oh, that's lucky. I was worried the D had snuck in there by mistake. Hey? Oh, no, right. Yeah, it was quite a handy little paragraph, but I think we're okay. Oh, Andy, that's a bad cough. You're doing well. Yeah.
Well, last night the NT government issued a warning about the air quality.
Did they?
Do it fires, yeah, about 9 o'clock last night.
They've done that a couple of times, actually.
Connor, they drive to go, probably fall asleep about 4:30 in the morning.
Oh, Lordy.
We got just started coughing in the car. I just got away from your hand and started again and she came back.
Oh, dear.
Lots of fires.
Fires, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
There's all soot and ash in my car.
Mm.
If I drive with the windows down.
Inside the house, like, because it's dry season, you have windows open.
Well, there was
Dust
the
everywhere.
warning was all about closing up your windows and
Wow.
and making sure your air conditioning system was ducted with on
You're right.
recirculation of air. It was
Oh,
serious.
yeah, right.
Well, I've never seen it before.
Kind of them, I suppose.
Staying inside.
Yeah. All right. So if you haven't already, make sure that you note the clauses and the planning scheme results on this checklist at some point. They're actually written out quite well on this checklist. The last one wasn't so good, so I got lucky there. Alright, so now what we'd like is to jump into the NCC clauses. We're going to start with C, fire resistance, and today I'm clicking on the links and it's going, Sandra. We got lucky. Now, do you remember when we first started investigating the Class 2 project, we had to work out what level of fire-resisting construction was required? Remember we talked about how you can have the class of building, but you also have to have a type of fire-resisting construction, and the higher a building goes, the higher the fire-resisting construction has to be, the more resistant to fire those buildings have to be. Remember the table we looked at that had the number of, here it is right here, the number of floors and the fire-resisting type construction that was required? And it was either A, B or C. And then as we were going through the NCC, for different parts, you got different requirements, particularly the FRL of floors and walls and roofs had differences depending on which fire type construction you were required to have. So for our Class 2 building, because it was 4 or more stories, it had to be fire-resisting type construction A. For this building, what clause type are we? We've got 6 and 7, both in the same column. That's helpful. It would be really tricky if we had part of this one and part of this one, so I'm glad of that. And we've got a rise in stories 1, 2, 3 or 4. Now technically a mezzanine isn't another story. Mezzanines are a bit funny. Now if we did what Sandra was going to say and change it to an office, you would then have to replace the balustrading with walls. You would have to bring air conditioning in, some thermal protection. There would be ceiling and walls and flooring and partitioning. That would be quite a different type of fit out. But this mezzanine is just a big open space with some railing that's not even, you don't have to comply with the 125 sphere in an industrial area. It would just be a couple of balustrades just to stop people from backing the forklift down there or something silly. It wouldn't be very strong barricade. Obviously you can do more than that, but that would be the minimum. So a mezzanine is not really a second story. How many stories do we have for our project, do you think? Just one, isn't it, I suppose? One office, and then the warehouse is column-free space as best we can get it, but it's completely open all the way to the top. It's very tall, isn't it? So forklifts can go high, trucks can go high, reaching and moving, packaging and boxes around. So it's just one. So what type of fire construction is required for our Class 6 and 7 one-story building? Excellent. You have it precisely. So already noted on the checklist, and you would put required next to that. Excellent. Just want to draw your attention very quickly to clause C1.3, buildings of multiple classification. So it says in a building of multiple classifications, the type of construction required for the building is the most fire-resisting type resulting from the application of the table. So if we've got car parking and retail and then car parking and then apartments and it starts to go higher, whatever you reach, that's for the whole lot. You don't say, oh, the ground floor is just the first floor, so we'll call that C type, and then the second floor is only C, then that'll be, it's a different class and it moves across. Everything, regardless, gets the most strength that it needs, depending on the table. So if parts of it get to A, everything is A. A bit there about Class 4, I'll just pass by that for now. The other thing I just want to show you is C1.8 just references lightweight construction. Now, we haven't really gone into a great deal of detail with regards to this project yet. That'll be next week's job. But if you're able to see, there's a little bit of information already sort of shown with regards to the way you draw construction. There's a little bit of information about that already on the drawings. There's a thickness to the walls. Can you see that? So typically, you might see a hatching that will let you know what that's going to be. We don't have a great deal of information about that right now in plan view, but if you go to the elevations, there's all these stripes. You see those? What do you think that might be referring to if you had to choose a material that that would be representing?
Corrugated iron.
We don't call it corrugated iron, but yes? Yep, cladding, steel cladding. So, Custom-Orb. Remember, the profile is called Custom-Orb. Yeah, yeah. Custom-Orb. Yeah.
One of the
Where the
correct
shiny bits are.
values of
Yeah.
it just gives you a little bit of a linear lines on the elevation.
Yeah. And they do cutaways to show where it's reflective to stop it from being such a big, massive drawing of stripes. And the doorways have them going the other way because roller doors can't bend if you don't have the creases where they need to go. So they have to be horizontal. Otherwise, the rollers won't be able to roll. It doesn't roll the other way. So we already have a bit of an idea that there's going to be lightweight construction. That's very light. See, Sandra's just carrying it around like it's nothing. It's very lightweight construction. So perhaps that might be... Yeah, play. Just watch it sharp. Yeah. Yeah. But have a look at where the office and the mezzanine will go. What hatch has that got? Yeah, it's got outlines like that wall, hasn't it? And that's not lightweight construction, not by any stretch. So we've got a bit of information there to already know what we might be dealing with. And there's just a little specification here, it's just saying lightweight construction must comply with the specification if it's used in a wall system. So that specification is the same specification we've already looked at to determine the FRLs for different parts of the building. And it's basically saying if it's lightweight construction, it still needs to comply. So there's no exception for that. All right, so here's our compartmentation and separation again. Remember that's an area and a volume calculation to determine whether compartmentation is required or not. Let's just have a bit of a look and see if anything's likely to be needed. What fire rating class construction are we again? C. So we've got to keep that in our minds because that will probably have some impact. So yeah, just leave it on the desk there, Shane.
So just over the weekend, in preparation for our materials unit next week, I'd like you to take as many pictures as you can of different types of lightweight cladding systems you can see around Darwin. Now you don't need to go out on a special mission to do this, we see them everywhere. But just as you're moving around over the weekend, just see how many pictures with your phone you can take of different types of cladding.
So here's our maximum size of fire compartments or atrium, so that's the singular for atrium. No, it's plural, apologies. Anyway, grammar, we don't need to worry about. And here's our classifications. And what are our classes again? 6 and 7B, excellent. So they're together again, which is handy. And then remember we're a type C construction. So the maximum floor area except for patient care needs to be 2,000 square metres for the first compartment to finish. That's the maximum size you can have as a single compartment. Now we are well below that, well below it. What did we say, 714 square metres? So we don't even need to worry about the cubic metre because we're so far below the square, we're never going to achieve the cubic either. We're probably looking at a maximum of 8.5 metres. So if we were to multiply 714 square metres by the 8.5 metres is the maximum we could achieve if it was a big square box. And I'm lumping it all together in this instance, the 6 and the 7, because they're treated the same. What's the cubic meterage of 714 square metres multiplied by 8.5 metres in height?
6,069.
So 6,000-ish, just over 6,000 cubic meters. Thank you, Juan. So not even half. So we are a single compartment. There's no requirement to compartmentalise our warehouse and office. That doesn't mean we don't have to have fire separation from different places, because fire in the warehouse really oughtn't to spread to the office. That's a separate thing. But as far as compartmentation goes, there's no clause requirement for us at this stage. So I've just written not required against that in the checklist. We've checked it and we've said we don't have to worry, so not required for compartmentation. I just wanted to bring your attention, because we haven't had this yet, just bring your attention to C2.3, which is a concession for large isolated buildings. So that's with regards to increasing the size of compartmentation if the building is all on its own, way out in the middle of nowhere. So it goes up to 18,000 square metres and 108,000 cubic metres before you have to compartmentalise. C2.4 is just with regards to requirements for open spaces and vehicular access. So if you need to have an open space as part of your compartmentation, it's just some explanations of what that means. Now, this isn't necessarily something we have to worry about because we don't require compartmentation. I just wanted to bring it to your attention. What we should always keep in mind is accessibility for fire services personnel. So that 5 metre setback that we've put aside is ideal for emergency services to be able to enter the building, enter the site, and get to either the back of our property or the back of the one ahead. Because sometimes when you're putting out a fire, everybody has to help each other out. So if the fire is near the back of your property, the fire service might want to access it from your side, even though you're not in danger. So I would perhaps advise the client to make a gate there so that it's not a solid fence and it doesn't ruin that access. You've gone to the trouble of making it available. It's not necessarily for access for power and water, which is what the easement is for. This is access for fire services, just temporarily. So they just drive on the grass. So that's just an aside. That's not necessarily mandated by the NCC.
If the building on fire, next door is on fire, you really want to help out as much as
yes,
you can.
otherwise it'll just get to you. And general industrial fires are often a lot worse than a standard house fire because of the flammability of the goods that are inside. Yeah, go. The flammability of the goods inside the warehouses or industrial spaces. So fires spread much more quickly.
Recently with the Asian United, that was
fast. Yeah.
Should we put that recommendation on our site plan?
Couldn't hurt. Yeah. So recommend a gate on the front entrance, because most industrial allotments have a fence, a security fence, right along the front, which is fine, but perhaps a gate there is a good idea. Yeah, right in front of the easement. I think that would be smart design. It's not really a requirement of compliance, it's just a good idea. And I'm sure during the certification process, the certifier would recommend it, and certainly when it goes to the fire services for their checklist, they would ask for it as well. So we're just preempting them. Yeah. So just right at the front of the building. I'll go back to the drawing for you. So just here, we have to keep this area empty. This is an easement, and the power and water service personnel that have to access the pipes underneath that need to be able to get to it. So we can't build there anyway, so we're saying we're going to put the setback here. So we've got no construction over this part of the land, and it's perfectly wide enough. 5 metres is very wide. That would be wide enough for a big fire truck to be able to drive on. And they would, even if the curb didn't allow for it, they would just jump that. They would just pop the curb and jump in. So if you put a gate here, you wouldn't necessarily use it all the time, but it would be good for an emergency. Thinking about rubbish removal and fire services is really important with regards to the way you work out your site, particularly for commercial. Those big rubbish bins can be tough. All right, so we want to go to that specification now to work out what our requirements are, our fire resisting construction requirements. So there was type A fire resisting constructions, and I've just gone straight past that. That was where we were the other day for our class 2 building. Type B fire resisting construction, I'm just breezing straight past that as well. Scrolling, scrolling, scrolling. Here we go, type C fire resisting construction. So you can have low-rise class 2 and 3 buildings, so they might still be sole occupancy units and apartment blocks, but they don't have type A construction. Ours was tall, so we did. But for this, we've got 2 columns now. Can you see that? There's our 6, and here's our 7B. They're getting different FRLs because they do different things. And if you think about it, that makes sense because the 6 is our office space, isn't it? So there's more likely to be more people in a smaller location that might take a little longer to get out. They might have to manoeuvre around desks, they might have to manoeuvre down corridors, or they might just have a bottleneck of people and need to escape quickly. And the other one, the 7B, our warehouse, is likely to be a very large space with less people concentrated. So they might have to have slightly different fire rating levels. There might be an appreciation of the type of use, so 7B being a place for wholesale of goods. They might consider that those goods might be highly flammable, and perhaps the FRL is longer for that. We'll see how we go. So external walls, and remember we still have this category about location, because if you are closer to a fire source, you have to have more fire rating to be able to escape. But if you're further away, the likelihood of fire being a problem is less, so the fire rating requirement of the wall is less. Now if you go back to your floor plan, our site plan if you like, let's have a bit of a look at where we actually are. So we've got 5 metres to this elevation, haven't we? We know that's definitely 5 metres away from a fire source. The fire source is anything else around the boundary. So we can make some fire for ourselves, and that's still an issue, but the fire source is coming from outside. So we're already automatically 5 metres away on this side. We don't really know how far away we are here, do we? This looks a little closer than the 3 metres that could be letting us outside the fire requirement. And this is 3 metres here, isn't it? This has got to be a minimum of 3 metres for the planning scheme, doesn't it? And we're remaining compliant with that. We're not seeking a setback waiver. So this has to be 3 metres here. So there's no requirement to worry about a fire source on this side. So it's really, this is the closest point to a boundary we've got. We're allowed to build on the 0 lot line on this side, but we're not. But what fire resisting construction do we need if that's within 1.5 metres or 3 metres? So, what information have we got about the size of the site plan? We got any? We've got boundary dimensions, haven't we, for this top boundary? It's not going to help us a great deal because our building is not parallel, but I just want to get an instinct. On the site survey drawing from NR Maps, how wide is the back line of the boundary? And our house, our building, sorry, how wide is that? 21 metres? 28 metres the site, is that right? Yep, sounds good. Now, it's on an angle, so we can't use it exactly, but we've got 21 metre wide building plus 5 metres for the easement. So we're already looking at 26 metres here. So this is 5, and this is 21. Now, it is on an angle, so we can't say exactly that if this line is 28 and we've got 26, that we've only got 2 metres left. But it's going to be within that range, isn't it? We're certainly closer to the boundary than 3 metres. If I go to the FRL table, you'll notice that there are 3 distinctions. There's less than 1.5 metres, between 1.5 metres and 3 metres, or over 3 metres in those increments from the boundary, the fire source potential. So what I'm perhaps proposing is that we are probably going to fall into this middle section, aren't we, when the final design comes down. Would that be fair to say? That we're most likely going to be within 1.5 metres and 3 metres of the boundary. Now you might like to keep a track of both, less than 1.5 metres and 1.5 to 3. but I'd be very surprised if we're away from the boundary 3 metres there. Now the tricky thing with construction is it's easier if everything is consistent as you're building. If you think about the FRL requirements of a building and you think about the way buildings work, if you were to change the construction for just that section, it would be an unusual thing to switch to if all of a sudden we started building differently for just this section. So we would have to build fire-resistant construction until we reached the 3 metre offset line. So wherever that is, everything that falls within that would have to receive the treatment that we needed to show the fire rating level. It would be a bit strange to just suddenly change construction at that point, wouldn't it? Connecting it together, the appearance might look a bit strange, waterproofing it might be a bit strange. We might switch from one type of construction to another simply to achieve an FRL for a small portion of the building, because everything else is beyond 3 metres away and doesn't need to worry about fire rating levels. So if we could identify a construction technique that achieves the fire rating level that we need in just that place, and it's not over and above too far for everything else, perhaps we might just follow that construction for everything. You with me? Yeah. So we'll see if we can find out what that might be. We'll have a look at the FRL ratings, and then we'll see if perhaps we can try and achieve that next week when we talk about construction. For now, we just want to note the actual FRLs. So for external walls, for our 6, it's 60, 60, 60. So 64, does anybody remember? Structure, yes, and then integrity, and then insulation. You guys are rocking it. Well done. So 60, 60, 60 for the office, and equally 60, 60, 60 for the warehouse. Well done. That's for the external walls. We don't have any external columns like we did with the car parks downstairs in the apartment block. Common walls and firewalls. What's a common wall? Yeah, a wall that's common to 2 spaces.
So between
Between the office and the warehouse, absolutely. I would imagine that would be something that you would want to rate quite highly. So they're expecting a 90, 90, 90 for both classes for the common wall. So there aren't any dividing walls in the warehouse and there aren't any formal walls in the office. They'll just be partitions a bit like ours. But the common wall that's structural between the warehouse and the office would have to be rated 90, 90, 90. Absolutely. Internal walls, nothing. And the roof also, nothing. There's just one here that says bounding a stair if required to be rated. We don't have a fire isolated stairway in our shed because we don't really have any change in stories. There'll be a little stairway down from the mezzanine, but that won't be fire isolated. It's not for people to work up there, it's just storage. So quite minor requirements with regards to fire rating levels for a single story type C construction. Did you catch all that down okay? So specification C 1.1.5, and everything's written on the checklist for you, so it'll be required on the checklist. There's a mistake on this checklist that I've crossed out on mine. You want to cross out on yours. The next row down says Type A construction table 3. It's not Type A construction, so you can cross that out. That must have just been left over from the copy and paste from the last checklist.
That whole line get rid of?
Yeah, the Type A construction. And I have a feeling the fire stairs beneath it might be related to that as well, but we'll just double check. Yeah, I don't think that's what we need to worry about, but we'll just double check anyway. How are we going for time? Oh, we better stop. That's a good place to stop, in fact. Go and have some lunch, and we'll regroup.
Yeah.
Not a moment to spare. Friday night's coming and we got to get there quick.
Do this on Friday afternoon.
After your acupuncture, you're better off standing up or sitting down.
I know what I'm better off doing.
Just relocate. Yep. Do what you need.
Moving is probably better than
Yeah.
standing still,
Yeah, that's
or
true.
that's why I was walking for much of the day. I
Yep.
stand still
Yep.
and locked up.
Just do laps.
I've had 3 laps last week
Oh, crikey.
because they're like the in the muscles.
NCC, Section C, fire protection, Type C construction. Where's my mouse? Here we go. Just cooking with gas. Fire hazard properties. No. Now we've already mentioned this before, but it bears repeating. Non-combustible materials. So you want to just make a little note that according to the NCC, these materials are non-combustible. So we will cover this in more depth next week when we cover materials, but it's good to know that this is what the NCC has in mind when they're talking about fire-resisting construction. So plasterboard, perforated gypsum lath with a normal paper finish or lathe, I'm not sure how it's pronounced. That's very similar to plasterboard, but it's perforated, but not in a great amount, not enough to spread fire. Fibrous plaster sheet, fibre reinforced cement sheeting, pre-finished metal sheeting having a combustible surface finish not exceeding 1 millimetre thickness and where the spread of flame index of the product is not greater than 0. So spread of flame is the way that the flame will move across the material. It has to be an index of 0, which is a testing requirement. The combustible surface is about the glues and the materials in the product that are not more than 1 millimetre thick. When you think about the actual thickness of 1 millimetre, in manufacturing pre-finished metal cladding, 1 millimetre is a lot. The glue they need for those kinds of finishes is maybe only a few microns thick. So it's actually very generous. 1 millimetre is a lot. I've got some products over here which have examples of them. I don't think that they've got the specifications with them. Here they are. So these are pre-finished metal sheeting. See, they've got an outside sheet and an inside sheet, and that's the facade that you would see. And then they've got a small ridged compartment in the middle to give it some rigidity in cross-section. So if you can imagine this is a big sheet, you don't want it to bend a great deal, so they use a small piece. And they're all glued together, but there is not even close to 1 millimetre of thickness of glue in there, and it's the glue that's flammable.
Sorry, just... Oh, you're talking about cool.
Got lots of them. I went to a road show with a fire. Yeah.
How do you have 12 up there?
Everybody gets to see. Oprah.
Yeah.
When you're pointing out that I was trying to find it, and I came across it, it says this cause been deliberately blank. I'm like,
C.112. What for?
I don't know, so I'm like, what? I'm going to write it down. I didn't have it on my screen, so I'll just copy it from there. But like,
Let me just check I'm on the same page. That's weird.
how's that? I don't get it. What are you looking at that? Look, this is what I've got up, and it's blank.
So I've got C.110 at the top right-hand corner. Have you got that on yours? The clause that I'm in, C.1110?
C1 point, oh, I got 1.
Oh, yours is 11, yeah. So yours is C.12, and yours is more recent than mine.
Yeah, so I'm just like, what?
That's weird.
That's why
That's
the
not
pages
random.
was matching up before, and I was
Yeah.
like, no more pages, like 2.
So I downloaded that. It's the 2016 volume, but it's...
That's
It is
weird.
2016 volume.
No, they have. Mm. They must have taken that one out.
I've only got 2 that's on, if I'm at where you're at,
Yeah.
yours is 94, mine's 97 pages.
Yeah, so it's...
So, and I have stuff something missing, so I'm like,
Yeah.
happened the other day, though, didn't
It
it?
did, yeah.
That's why some stuff have been,
Mm.
the one, what was that program you said? What's the program
Bluebeam.
again?
Bluebeam, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not the program that's changing that, that's just
No,
the...
that's PDF itself.
I'm just curious because it does look different.
So my thoughts on that would probably be that this is very much the clause that deals with, do you remember we talked about cladding materials?
Yeah, they've taken it out.
And there's huge amount of research and, you know, investigation going on.
The
at
amendment,
moment
like
into cladding
Adriana
and
said, they've taken it out.
disability. So they may have taken the amendment out.
It's the one thing they have changed. And they've picked out a few clauses and pinged them as well.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. So that's naughty of me not to have the most up-to-date version and to keep the amendments in mind. I'm glad you guys are onto it. So bonded laminated materials, similar concept because bonding is glue and glue is flammable because it's got petrochemicals in it. So bonded laminated materials. So this isn't necessarily laminated because lamination is flat and this has got a surface inside it. So you probably could argue that that's not the case. But laminated materials are where multiple surfaces are glued together. What do you reckon I should put my hands on for laminated material?
No.
I can't even find one.
No, I can't find. I'm not.
Oh, you're big excited, I think, from the looks of it. What page number is that?
Oh, yeah, that's not too bad. Yeah, it's got laminated timber and lamination on top. Awesome. Yeah, lovely. So this materials apply, which is actually a laminated product. So there's, in this section, you can see there's lots of sections all squeezed together and glued. That's called lamination. So you can do it with glass, you can do it with timber, you can do it with timber. These are all the same thicknesses and there's no gaps and there's no movement. It's just flat. Yeah. So the product that you buy that has colour that you stick on chipboard to create bench tops is called laminate because that's the process that you use to connect it. This, on the other hand, is not a lamination. This is all one product. And they specifically sell this, explaining that everything is all formed together. This is a resin-based product that doesn't have any layers. Because the trouble with things that are laminated, they go together, but they can also come apart. So moisture and heat and light can make them all peel apart in degradation. So this one is not laminated, and that one is. This one is.
That one says on yours?
Yeah.
All right, better not get too carried away. So for a bonded laminated material, every laminate has to be non-combustible, no more than 1 millimetre thickness of adhesive, a total thickness of adhesive of no more than 2 millimetres, and a spread of flame and smoke develop index, not more than 0 and 3 respectively. So technically I should not have read that out to you at all, because it technically doesn't exist anymore. It's very interesting. So we'll just have a bit of a scan on the amendment next week when we look at materials. Where's my checklist gone? Put it down. Nope.
An example of a laminated material.
Oh wait, the one.
Not that one, the timber.
So laminated materials are only as strong as their glue.
Yeah. They do crisscross patterns, that helps, but...
And so a material that's not laminated is called composite material. It means that the same material goes all the way through. Laminated means that one material stuck to another material. It can be the same material or a different material.
Laminated glass, laminated steel, laminated timber, laminated plastic, lots of things.
Twins are laminated humans.
They don't delaminate though.
Stuck together with
It's a resin. You can use it as wall cladding, ceiling lining. It's an external product. You don't see it much in the territory because we don't have a deemed to comply for its fixing. But there's some examples just down the back corner. It's called Trespa. Yeah, it's lovely. It's very popular interstate. All right, part C3, protection of openings. That fire stairs 1 times 50 people is not applicable to this project. That went with the Type A construction, so you can cross that out as well. All right. Protection of openings in external walls. So we were determining the fire rating level of the walls if they're within 1.5 metres, between 1.5 metres and 3 metres of a fire source, the boundary. to determine what the fire rating level of the construction needs to be. And we were talking about the fact that our 5 metre setback is beyond the 3 metre increment line, so where we have to have type C fire rated construction, it's not necessary to have the FRL when it's so far away from the boundary, but we do have one aspect of the block which will probably be between 1.5 and 3 metres away from the adjacent boundary, just on the other side of the loading bay. So we were talking about if that has to have an FRL, will we make the whole building match, because changing construction for just that end of the building might be a bit of a nuisance. So we'll have to leave that until next week to resolve that answer. The other part that we have to check with regards to fire rating is openings. So if you've got a fire rated wall and there's an opening within that wall in that zone, you have to treat the opening the same way as you have to treat the wall. Now, if you've got a fire rated expectation of construction and there's an opening like a window or a door, it has to still do the same protective work as the wall does. But the wall doesn't get opened and closed, the door and the window might. So what we just have to check now is if we've got any openings in that zone. Now, we already had a bit of a look at the site plan, and I'll just show you the clause. So C3.2, openings in an external wall that is required to have an FRL, so only the part that is required to have an FRL, even though we might treat the construction of the whole project similarly as that part, the rest we don't have to protect the openings because it's not technically required to have an FRL. So where it is required, if the distance between the opening and the fire source feature, which is our boundary, to which it is exposed is less than 3 metres from a side or rear boundary, or 6 metres from the far boundary of a road, river, lake or the like, adjoining the allotment, if it's not located in a storey at or near ground level, or 6 metres from another building on the allotment that is not a class 10. So if we have any of those circumstances, it needs to be protected in accordance with C3.4, and if the wall wetting sprinklers, if they are in place, are used, they are located externally. Now, we don't have wall wetting sprinklers. That would be a little excessive for this fire type C construction. So we definitely don't have those, but if that was the case, then there would be a concession. So we're just going to have a quick look at our floor plan and our elevations. So we're predicting that perhaps part of this area might be within the 1.5 to 3 metre zone offset from the boundary. Just this area here. If you imagine that was vertical on the site plan, you have to rotate it in this drawing to be able to fit it on the page easily enough. But this was the area near the loading bay that we were concerned about. Is everybody with me? So we're further than 6 metres, further than 3 metres away here for the wall. We are within maybe 1.5 and 3 metres here. There's a good chance that this is within the 3 metres. We don't know yet, but it might be, but this is 5 metres away. Now, we said 3 metres setback here. Let me just check that clause again, because it talked about the road differently, didn't it?
6 metres.
Yes. Oh, yeah, to the far boundary of a road. So I think we're okay there, but we probably just better make a note of that. So I guess that's an expectation that there will be an allotment on the other side of the road. So you measure to the far side of the road, and if that's within 6 metres, you'd have to protect the openings. Not the case for us in this instance. But 3 metres from a side or rear boundary. So definitely we're within 3 metres of a side boundary. So we have to protect our openings there. The tricky part is, we don't actually, well, it's not tricky, it's good. We don't actually have any openings on this wall here. And that's where the 3 metre line is. Now, if we offset here 3 metres, there's a chance we would hit this line here. So we would just have to make sure that this opening here and this opening here fell outside the 3 metre zone. You can't really protect that opening. It's a roller door, so it's not automatic closing. The thing with openings is they have to either stay permanently shut and be fire rated. So glazing, a window, can be fire rated, but you cannot be able to open that window. It has to be fixed. Doors, however, do need to open because that's what doors do, so they have automatic closes. And you're not allowed to prop them open. You might see signs for fire doors where it says do not prop open, that sort of stuff, and people get cranky. So fire doors are heavy and they're also automatically closing behind you, and you have to let them do that. But a roller door doesn't work that way. A roller door has to stay open because that's what roller doors do. So you wouldn't be able to protect this opening if it was in 3 metres of this boundary in accordance with that clause. So we just have to make sure that these two openings are beyond 3 metres from that setback. Make a note of that on your site plan. I predict they'll be okay, but we just need to make sure of it. So it's required, and you want to just make a little note that that stays in people's minds. So C3.2, protection of openings in external walls. And just mark those two openings and say, maintain distance of 3 metres from side boundary. Okay, so the next one, C3.5, is with regards to fire doors in fire walls. So remember we determined that we needed to have an FRL rating for the wall between the warehouse area and the office area? And you'll notice on the floor plan there's an indication of some doors that would go between the two spaces. And they look like they're trying for double doors, so that perhaps cartons can be brought in for sale in the retail area from the warehouse storage. That makes sense. Or it might be about taking equipment out of the office and storing it in the mezzanine, maybe paperwork and filing and whatnot. Never can say, but a double door sounds like a good idea. There's a little note here in C3.5 that says a fire door or fire shutter, and it says single. We've got two leaves, but it's still a single opening. A single fire door which has an FRL of not less than that required by the specification for the wall, except for that each door or shutter must have an insulation level of at least 30. So if for whatever reason the FRL was less than 30 on the insulation section, you would have to meet at least 30. That's not the case for us. We already have a higher FRL for the wall between the warehouse and the office. Can anybody remember what it was?
Sorry?
The FRL for the wall between the warehouse and the office, the doors have to match. So what was the FRL? It was 90, which is 90 minutes or an hour and a half of burning where structure, integrity and structure and insulation maintains. So the doors have to do the same work, otherwise what would be the point? So make a note on your floor plan. Doors, FRL, 90. Now they've got swinging doors. They're the kinds of doors that Sandra was talking about that perhaps might have a magnetic latch that releases if the fire alarm goes off, or they might be the kinds of doors that have those push bars where you can just push them open to go through and then they have to close behind you. So they'll be quite heavy and they'll be automatic closing. Or perhaps we could invest in a fancy hydraulic sliding compartmentation door, you know, the ones that sort of come out and slide shut. But it would have to have an FRL of 90 to do it. And it would have to be automatically closing. The electric ones are probably a bit of a nuisance if you cut the power. So perhaps not such a great idea.
I think that's why they use the magnets. So if
Regardless,
the power fed
yep.
the magnets,
They undo automatically, yep. Now you're probably already thinking to yourself, that's going to be interesting when we come around to do the exit signage. So keep that in the back of your mind. Quite a bit in this section about class 2 and 3 buildings. So a lot of the clauses that are in here are mostly about them. There's examples of construction techniques and the different acoustic ratings of the walls. Did there used to be examples of construction with the fire ratings attributed?
there are, but they're in volume 1.
Are there?
Yeah.
They don't do it for commercial, probably because they have to be...
Volume 2, I mean,
Yeah, I know what you mean, yeah. So they have to be tested independently every time.
no, those forms of construction are given that they'll reach a certain FRL.
There's some, isn't there?
Yeah, but they're in the domestic one. They're not in the volume 1.
Mm.
In volume 2.
And we just apply them over.
Yeah, you can.
So we'll see that next week. Yeah, I'm with you. Section D, access and egress. So part D2, let me just check in 1, provision for escape. Number of exits required. All buildings, every building must have at least one exit from each story. It's a good place to start, isn't it? Do we have at least one exit from each story? Lots. Roller doors are exits. Front doors from the reception are exits. Off the mezzanine, down the stairs and out the door is an exit. There's lots of exits. It's required and compliant. Well, required is probably given. Then it's got another bit. It says class 2 to 8 buildings, in addition to any horizontal exit, not less than 2 exits must be provided from the following. Each story of the building that has an effective height of more than 25 metres, that's not us. Or in a class 2 or 3 building subject to C1.5, also not us. So no requirement for additions there. Then there's basements, class 9 buildings, exits from 9C, exits from open spectator stands, and access to exits. So that's a little note about having to not pass through another sole occupancy unit to get to that exit. We talked about that last week with the hotels and motels and interconnected rooms and things like that. So we're compliant. We have an exit. Pretty straightforward, that one. Exit travel distances, D1.4, that's got class 2 and 3 buildings as A, then B is class 4, and then C is class 5, 6, 7, 8 or 9. So both our 6 and our 7 are in the same section. So a little note here about the distance of travel, because obviously it's no good having an exit if it's so far away that you can't get there in time in an emergency. So no point on a floor must be more than 20 metres from an exit, or a point from which travel in 2 different directions to 2 exits is available, in which case the maximum distance to one of those exits must not exceed 40. So 20 metres to one, or 40 metres to one of 2. So if you've got 2 exits, you can double the length because you have a choice. There's a little note here about 5 or 6, so we'll just read the 6. In a class 6 building, the distance to a single exit serving a story at the levels of access to a road or open space may be increased to 30 metres. So if you're in a 6 and you're on the ground floor, which we are, and we only have a single exit, which we do, it can be 30 metres. How wide is our office? 14 metres from one end to the other. So if you were right down the back on the toilet, you could still get out. What about the warehouse? So 20 metres to a single exit, we have more than one. 32.5 metres to the length. So even if you were in the toilet, right down the back of the warehouse, you would be quite close to the adjacent roller doors. Well and truly within 20 metres. But you can see where we're coming from. Yeah. So if there weren't as many roller doors, that might be a bit of a difficulty and we might ask for more. Because they're not open. Oh, that's why they've got this one here. Yeah, and that's the one. Yeah. So you're right. So Sandra just reminded me you're not supposed to use... Yeah, good point. I did know that last year. I've just forgot it.
Yeah.
So I'm just quickly going to go back. So we can't really rely... Because roller doors get left shut and they take forever to open. We don't really want to be using those in an emergency. So we've got this one here and this one here. They're technically our exits. So we sub 2, so it's 40 metres and it's still well in the compliance from the furthest away distance that you could perhaps think of. What's that clause number?
If they're coming from the office, they have to go...
They go this way,
to the warehouse. Oh, no,
out the front door.
Yeah, okay.
So D1.2 is the number of exits, so a minimum of 1 per story. We really need the 2 in the warehouse to increase the travel distance to 40 metres though, don't we? Because perhaps if this was the only one we had, that might be asking a little bit much of all this space to exit through just one tiny little door. So I think that's pretty wise. Not to mention, you know, it's convenient.
And so also remember, in like the furthest point is probably going to be someone who's located here on the mezzanine level.
Down the stairs.
Travel across here. So this is why you measure passive travel distance. You would draw a line in your AutoCAD or Revit. You would draw a line from there to there, and then to there, and then down the center point of the stairs, which brings you to here. And then you would take the shortest route from there to the exit. And then you measure the length of the whole line, which is quite easy to do in the software. You just draw it as a polylining and, you know, ask for the information on the line, it'll tell you the length of it.
So if it was only single exit, it would only be 20 metres, and that wouldn't be far enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got the 40. All right. So travel by, that's 1 point, what number was that? I don't think I have that on the checklist.
No.
Might need to add that. So D1.4. I've written it on the right-hand side. I must have added it last year. So make an extra row on your checklist, D1.4, exit travel distances, and it'll be D1.4C. Just write that down myself.
I'm jotting them down here.
Good on you. Now there should be a little note with a minimum clearance. I'm just going to scroll a little further. Dimensions of exits and paths of travel. Here it is. So D1.6, we haven't got that noted on here as well. I've just made a little note to add it and then never got around to it clearly. So D1.6, dimensions of exits and paths of travel to exits. Not really a huge concern because we've got such a big warehouse, but obviously if there's any restriction to that exit, then that's going to slow you down. And I suppose when we think about it, this looks nice and easy to exit on the plan now, but that's because the warehouse is empty. But it's not going to be empty when it's in use. It's going to have, you know, sort of corridors of shelves and equipment and, you know, all sorts of things in the way, obstructions. So that's probably a bit of a gap in the certification process there. Unless you're expected to illustrate how you're going to lay out the equipment in the building to recalculate the travel distance. Because you might have to go around.
That is just to allow an extra, you know, couple of meters, you know, don't have it so tight that if that
that it's barely compliant. Yeah, because if the shelving goes right up to the wall between the toilet and the exit, you would have to go all the way up the other end and back. That's too far. So there probably need to be a little bit of an expectation of an understanding of maintaining those travel distances when you're fitting out the warehouse as well. I don't know how well that gets articulated. That's quite sophisticated when you think about it, but it's kind of important. And I think the fire inspectors do come around and check periodically, so then they would flag it and you would have to rearrange the furniture, but still.
Yeah, I know the school that was meant to take all the shelving out of their storeroom for that very reason.
Really?
Yeah, and when the fire did their inspection, the travel distance was too great.
Yeah, right.
They weren't supposed to store goods in the plant room as well, so they weren't storing goods in there.
Oh dear. Yeah.
And the other thing I've seen done in warehouses especially is that the floor is marked as the fire exit.
Oh yeah, that's a good way.
You know, some line marking, and so keep clear. So you're not allowed to put your shelving or your equipment on.
And you'll see that for safety markings where you're allowed to walk and not walk in a lot of these kinds of general industry places. So it would service both purposes there. That's probably the best way to see it in place, is to make that part of your commissioning, is to mark the areas. So we've got a required exit or a path of travel to an exit. The unobstructed height throughout must be not less than 2 metres, except the unobstructed height of any doorway may be reduced to not less than 19.8. So they're just allocating for the frame there, just to be clever.
Minutes.
I know, and doors in commercial premises are still the same height as in residential premises. They're still 2.1, because the manufacturers make doors, and they're all the same. So we're quite compliant with 2.1 metre head heights here. We're just above that for our unobstructed height through the opening.
So just on a note there about fire doors, on your drawing set, we tend to number all the doors on plan, and then in a working drawing set you have something which is called a door and window schedule, where you call up each door individually according to its number on the plan, and you say what the properties of the door might have to be, and that's exactly where you would put the FRL of a door if it was required to be a fire door. You might also put other information in there. You might put glazed panel required, or you might put the type of locking system that's required on the door. So all of that information goes into a drawing sheet called a door and window schedule. just as it's
And the hardware of fire-rated doors is different to normal doors. You certainly can't have anything complicated. It's got to be easy enough to operate in the dark, under duress, with smoke inhalation, sirens blaring, fear, adrenaline, all those things. You don't want to have any concerns or confusions about how a door opens. And obviously they have to open out. You don't ever want a fire door opening in, because that's not possible.
They use that single hand maneuver. So
Yeah.
you know when you get the bar on the fire door, it has to be with a single hand push in the direction of travel that's going to open out with you. So you know you don't want to have to fiddle around with the lock. You don't want to have to use two hands to do something, and you don't want to have to pull the door in, so you have to step backwards. It has to be single action, push door opened, and exit in the path of travel, in the direction of the path of travel. Certainly, if your door window schedule says that the door could be locked with a key lock or something like that, completely non-compliant. So obviously you can't be able to lock fire doors. Now we often see fire doors, the exit door is there for this warehouse. You don't want people to be able to come in that door in the middle of the night and take everything out of the warehouse. So the door often would be just blank on the outside with no handle or no way of getting inward, because it's a fire door, it only opens in the outward direction with the bar.
And you often see they've got a sign on them saying it's an alarmed door. So that's a way of people being aware that the door's been opened, because if you prop it open, then it stops being a fire prevention, and it also is a security issue. So we have to know about that, because it's supposed to stay closed. So the alarm just alerts people to let people know that, security, because big buildings, you can't see it, line of sight is gone. So then it just alerts people. And it's often out to places you don't want the public going, so it discourages people from going. What have we got here? The unobstructed width of each exit or path of travel to an exit except for doorways must be not less than 1 metre or 1.8 metres in a passageway, corridor or ramp normally used for the transportation of patients in beds, not an issue for us, or in the public corridor of a 9C building, it's a bit wider, again not us. If the story, mezzanine or open spectator stand accommodates more than 100 persons, again not us. So a minimum of 1 metre. So if we were marking out the footpath within that 20 metres or 40 metres to the door, it would have to be at least 1 metre wide.
I've got 200 persons.
Yeah, that's the next bit down. Not more than 100, but not more than 2.
Oh, sorry, I'm reading it.
Accommodates more than 100, but not more than 200. Yeah. We don't quite have that many. We will have stairs down from the mezzanine, but they'll probably just be standard stairs, so exactly the same phenomenon that you read for the class 1 and 10 with the risers and going calculations, because they do want the risers to be consistent, and they do want a maximum number of steps in a flight, but the 125mm sphere doesn't apply necessarily in a commercial building, because it's not so much about where people live and kids and safety and things. They're not supposed to be there in the first place. What else? Mezzanine for more than 200, an open spectator stand, patient care areas, so that's all 9C. So that's everybody else. So just 1 metre for us. So make a note. Dimensions of exits and paths of travel, so D1.6A, sorry. Is it A? Oh, A, yes. 2 metre height, minimum 2 metre height, and B, 1 metre width. D1.6. Scrolling on through. Travel via fire isolated exit. So we don't have a fire isolated exit. External stairways or ramps in lieu of fire. So we don't have any external stairways either. 1.9, travel by non-fire isolated stairways or ramps. We do have one of those. So if, in the case of a fire, somebody's upstairs in the mezzanine, they'll be travelling via the non-fire isolated stairway and then out through the exit. So a non-fire isolated stairway serving as an exit, well, it's not technically serving as a required exit. We'll go with it anyway and just see where it leads us. It must provide a continuous means of travel by its own flights and landings from every story served to the level at which egress to a road or open space is provided. So remember we talked last week about not splitting the stairs for the Class 2 building, not having one flight at one end of the corridor and the next floor flight at the other end. It's got to be all continuous on the one side. That's this rule, but we've only got one flight, so it's not really a huge issue. 2, 3 and 4, not asked. 5. In Class 5, 6, 7, 8, so 7 and 8, the distance from any point on a floor to a point of egress to a road or open space by way of required non-fire isolated stairway must not exceed 80 metres. So we've got 80 metres to get from the far back corner of the mezzanine, down the stairs like Sandra pointed out, and then out the exit. I think we'll be okay, but you want to just make a note. Now, I did make a boo-boo on the checklist. It says, under D1.9, egress to open space within 20 metres from the threshold. It's actually 80 metres from the most far point. It's probably still true. We haven't gotten to that yet. That's E, and we're still up at C. So the threshold is the bottom of the stairs to the exit. So that might still be true, but just squeeze in between A and E, we need C, which is the So when we get to E, we might find that's still true, but I just wanted to add in C. So D is 2, 3 and 9A. Back to E again, here we go. So in a Class 5, 5 to 8, so our 6 and 7 are in there. In a Class 6 and 7 building, a required non-fire isolated stairway or a non-fire isolated ramp must discharge at a point not more than 20 metres from a doorway providing egress to a road or open space. So that's from the bottom of the stairs to the exit, has to be within 20 metres. Or 40 metres from one of 2 such doorways or passageways if travel to each of them from the non-fire isolated stairway is in opposite or approximately opposite directions. Now that's not the case. We've got one and then further is the other. So I would argue that we would just count the one and it would be 20 metres. Because they're not opposite directions, it's more continuous. Point that out, just go back to the site plan. So if we're coming down the stairs here, this is the closest exit. You could probably go through here, but that's not really the path of exit that I'm designing for this, I don't think. This is going the wrong way. So it's not really about leaving from here through here. This is for these guys, but it has to be within 20 metres to get to there. It'll be close. Diagonal is further than direct line, so it'll be close. D1.9, D1.10, let's just see. D1.10, discharge from exits. An exit must not be blocked at the point of discharge where necessary suitable barriers must be provided to prevent vehicles from blocking the exit or access to it. Has any of you ever noticed bollards outside of buildings or in front of doors? They're just sort of waist height concrete or steel pillars that are concreted into the ground. Yeah, that's what that's for. Stops people from being able to park right in front of it. I have noticed a clever strategy by a bike shop in Coconut Grove of an evening. They park their van right against the front door. Right up on they're underneath the awning. Like they must have to back and back and back and get right closer. And then you can clearly open the sliding door in the van and either exit from the driveway or driver's side or go back through the building, like it's right in front of the doors. And I think they're doing it as like a security technique. The bollards were there like they were supposed to be, so it's obviously an old building. The bollards were there like they were supposed to be. They wouldn't be able to do that.
So
Blue Cycles, I think. Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just a cool, yeah. It's not cool, yeah. It's clever, but
Too bad if someone's
there's nobody home in the evening, but if Yeah, we kind of do. We are supposed to protect people who are there illegally from hurting themselves. Seems a bit unfair. So he's kind of doing that. But anyway, they shouldn't be in there in the first place, which is a moral argument, not a NCC argument.
So that whole clause is really just saying that, you know, you don't want people getting to their point of exit and not being able to open the door. Obviously, if there's a fire inside the building, that's pretty much a disaster. You're trying to escape.
Yeah.
So the bollards outside the door just allow enough for the door swing, which opens outwards, to go out. And it has been known to happen that people have got to that point and they can't open the door. Not because the door is locked, but because there's a vehicle outside that doesn't allow them to open the door wide enough to actually escape.
Yeah.
It's very unfortunate.
And when you think about it, all these rules exist because somebody has perished in the past. That's usually why something gets made a rule. So it's a pretty awful thought. If a required exit leads to an open space, the path of travel to the road must have an unobstructed width throughout of not less than the minimum width of the required access, or 1 metre, whichever is greater. We have wide open space. It's not a concern. It's compliant. But if you want to add D 1.10, discharge from exits, Section A and B are probably a good idea.
Is that the site plan there?
Yeah, yeah.
To do with that. So the other thing you have to be careful of in a site such as this, and this happens sometimes, is that on the site itself, so perhaps back here, we've decided that we want, for security reasons, to put some fencing back there so people can come in here into this part of the yard, but they can't get back to the back of the building. So we have to always be cautious of that, because for fire and design for fire, when these are the exits, the person has to be able to come out here and exit out onto the roadway. It's not enough for them to be still on the site. They have to get out to the roadway. So perhaps if you're putting a fence through there, it's got to have a gate in it that's also opening in the path of travel and is not lockable and allows people to escape out to open space. You don't want to be caught back here. The building's on fire. You don't want to be trapped in the space back here you can't escape from, because you've got, 6 foot fencing all around you and, got barbed wire on the top, which we often see in industrial areas. So you need to be able to think about the person. Where did they go after they actually exit the building and are still on the site externally?
Good point. Very good point. Thank you. All right. Where were we? Just finish off D 1.10. If an exit discharges to open space that is at a different level than the public road to which it is connected, the path of travel to the road must be by a ramp or incline with a gradient not steeper than 1 in 8. And then there's information about Class 9A building. So keep your ramps gentle and convenient in the path of travel for a fire. Not an issue for us because it's all one level, but if ever in the future. Little note here, D says the discharge point of alternative exits must be located as far apart as practical. That makes sense, I suppose, because if you've got a big group of people, you don't want everybody coming to the same discharge point. And then 9B
again. I've seen it in a few designs where designers have tried to just put 2 exit doors right beside each other and say, yeah, we've got 2 exits.
Oh, no.
Because this is the clause that says that's not possible. You can't do that. They need to be
I hadn't thought of that.
separated.
My brain just didn't even go there.
You will be that designer one day. You'll be go, why can't I put 2 right beside each other?
I can't make it myself.
Mighty right now, so I will never do that.
So true. Horizontal exits. So just as a little note here, and I confess, unless you know better, Sandra, I struggle with the difference between a horizontal exit and a required exit.
I think horizontal exits are basically talking about where you've got all different levels on the building.
Horizontal exit means a required doorway between 2 parts of the building separated from each other by a firewall. Yep, okay. I did know that, but I'd forgotten I knew it. Oh.
Yeah, so if you've got on the same level, like we talked about RDH the other day, we've got compartmentalization between 2 sections of a building on the same level. We talked about those magnetic doors, and so they obviously, these doors need to be part of that fire wall or fire separation wall.
Just having trouble with my mouse here, don't mind me. And then the other one was a that was horizontal exit, wasn't it? So between fire, so our double doors between the warehouse and the office is a horizontal exit because it's in a fire rated wall. Is that right?
Yes, but you can't, when you've compartmentalised the building.
Oh,
what
which
it's
we
saying is that
don't trigger in this one.
So let's say the example we took the other day, so this half of our classroom is one compartment and down beyond the wall there is a separate compartment. You can't be required to exit through that compartment. You need to have a horizontal exit that doesn't take you through that compartment, because that's the whole point of compartmentalisation, that part could be actually on fire and you have to be self-sufficient.
Yeah. So the required exit can't be on the other side of it. So you can't count the horizontal exit as a required exit. We've got to have another one. Okay. So we are required to have a minimum of one exit or two, depending on the path of travel. We've got two, so we've got the longer path of travel, so they're both required, but you can't count a horizontal exit like the one between the warehouse and the office as a required exit. So we weren't counting those double doors as one of the two that we were going to in our travel path. There you go. So I've just got a little note here, D1.11, horizontal exits do not equal required exits. So if you want to make a little mental note there of the difference between a horizontal exit and a required exit, now's a good time, because I've been trying to keep that stuck in my head for years and it just never stays there. So don't be surprised if it happens to you too.
Can you repeat that note that you just said?
A horizontal exit is between two fire compartments and can't be counted as a required exit. And there's a little note here, D.12. I haven't noted it down on the checklist because it's not applicable to this, but it's about non-required stairways, ramps or escalators. We haven't had an instance where that's the case, but we have a stairway now that's not required. It's not a required exit as such. But it's basically saying don't make it too tall, not too many stories for those stairways. We only have a single story, so we're compliant. All right, number of persons accommodated. For the purposes of deemed to satisfy provisions, which are all these provisions, the number of persons accommodated in a story, room or mezzanine must be determined with consideration to the purpose for which it is used and the layout of the floor area by calculating the sum of the numbers obtained by dividing the floor area of each part of the story by the number of square metres per person listed in the table, according to the use of that part, excluding spaces set aside for lifts, stairways, ramps and escalators, corridors, hallways, lobbies and the like, so circulation spaces are not where people are accommodated, and service ducts and the like, sanitary compartments or other ancillary uses. So typically if you've got a person working in an office and there's a toilet facility for them to use, you don't have to use the toilet facility to calculate numbers of people accommodated because it's that same person that uses the office and the toilet. So the toilet and ancillary kitchenettes and things like that are not necessarily counted for number of people occupied. The reason why we want to know how many people are occupied is so we can know how many facilities to provide for that number of people. So a bit like we did for the car parking, we need to know how many square metres we've got, and then we divide that by the number of people per square metre to find out how many people we're accommodating. So that's really very little to do with the office division that we've got on our floor plan. We've already got sort of 2 or 3 office sizes divided up ready to go, but the NCC is not really interested in that because you could fit 2 desks in one office perhaps. So even though it looks like a room for one person, you might be able to fit more than one person in there, and that's what they're going for. So it's overall, and it includes all the square meterage and walls and what have you. So here's the types of uses. Let's see if we can see what we've got. So it's not an art gallery, not a bar, not a boardroom or a boarding house or a cafe, not a car park, not a computer room, a courtroom, a dance floor, a dormitory, an early childhood centre. Here we've got factory. Let's have a bit of a look at this. What do they consider a factory? A machining shop, a fitting shop or the like, a place for cutting, grading or finishing. So we're not manufacturing anything. That's what a factory is mostly for. Or for use of fabrication and processing. So we're not turning something into another thing. There's no process work in our operation at this point. A space in which the layout and natural use of fixed plant or equipment determines the number of persons. So we don't really have any fixed plant equipment either. It's simply storage and sale. Bless you. It's not a gymnasium, a hostel, an indoor sports stadium or a kiosk. It's not a kitchen, laboratory or laundry. It's not a library, but it's an office. Here we go. Office including one for typewriting or document copying. That's cute. So 10 what? Back up to the top of the table. 10 metres squared per person. So one person for every 10 square metres. We have 84 square metres. So 8.4 persons. Better make it 9. We don't want like 0.6 of a person just floating around. 9 people in the office.
So it doesn't matter how many desks we can fit into that area. We don't count desks. We use this table to calculate the amount of persons that could potentially fit into the office.
Now, did something a little bit too fancy, I think. I've divided off a small part at the front and called that a shop, but I forgot about the mixed use part. So 84 square metres of the office is more correct, I think, than worrying about separating off where the public might come right at the front, where there's just a little reception desk. So on the checklist where it's got shop, direct access, 3 square metres per person, I would perhaps not consider that to be a part of the use, because it's far less than 10% of the overall building. So where I've got office 10 metres squared per person, that's correct. Put a little note on the right hand side, 84 metres squared equals or therefore, 3 dots in a triangle, therefore 7 people, 8. What did I say? 9 people, sorry, yes, 8.4 or 9 people. I don't think this is one of those instances where you add them up and then round up. I think this is separate because the class is separate. So if we were treating the whole project as one class, we would maybe consider arguing that we could treat the calculation of people accommodated as one class, but it really doesn't talk about classes in this table, it's the use. So I think we're correct in using the office for that front part. Now the mezzanine is going to be storage the same as the rest of the warehouse, so we will include the mezzanine in the use of the same as the warehouse. Let's see if we can find something that it will work for. Patient care, plant room, reading room, restaurant, school. None of the above. What did I use? Storage space. Where's that? Is there more? Maybe there's more. Hang on. I might have stopped prematurely. Yes. There it is. There's lots more. Shop, showroom, skating room, spectator, storage space. 30 square metres per person. Swimming pool, switch room, telephone exchange, theatre, theatre dressing, transport and workshop. Oh, it's not really a workshop, but it's close, isn't it? That's the same though, 30. Look, that's handy. So if ever somebody changes the use, the number of people accommodated and the facilities provided for them will be compatible. Lucky. Probably not luck. Probably like years of experience. We have to give them some credit. So 30 square metres, and we've got 630 square metres. Yeah?
630 divided by 30.
9.
21.
21. I knew that. So close.
Yeah.
630 square metres at 30 square metres per person is 21 people. That does seem a little bit excessive to me, to be honest. Just because you can doesn't mean you will. So 21, I can't imagine there ever being 21 people on staff at a warehouse where you show up for wholesale electrical goods. I think maybe 5 would be probably the most you would see, plus a couple in the office, so it's quite generous.
A lot of the floor space will be used for like pallets and stuff.
Yeah, yep. But that's okay. It's not an unreasonable amount when you see what's actually required, so it's not too big a drama. We covered this the other day, this measure of distances. It's about the way that you calculate distances of travel and the nearest points. So I won't re-go over it. Just remember that it's there. Plant rooms, lift machine rooms and electrical network substations. Concession. Don't have any of those, I don't think. One of the good things about these kinds of buildings is they're very lightweight construction. They might heat up fairly quickly, but they also cool down really quickly. So if you open the roller doors and get the ventilation through, the actual inside of the shaded shed can actually be quite comfortable if you keep the air circulation going. There's some really big ass fans you can buy these days. That's what they're called, big ass fans. They circulate the air really brilliantly, so Bunnings has them. I think they have air conditioning as well a bit though. Access to lift pits, not applicable. Construction of exits, part D.2, D2. Why am I looking at D? I thought I'd been here already. I feel like I'm going over the same stuff. Am I going insane?
No.
I really feel like I should be up to D3, construction of access.
Did you say that we don't have to worry about the shelf space?
Yes, I made a mistake in thinking on the checklist that the area at the front that you might make retail sales to would be treated differently.
Yeah.
I don't think that it will be.
I'll give you a minute there just to find where you are next if you want. Just one thing I felt like that we haven't talked about at the moment is fire isolated stairways and fire isolated ramps. And then give me an indication of what I think that might be.
Yep,
So in our building, we have an open stairway from that mezzanine down. So that's a completely different thing. That's just counted as in your path of travel. But when you've got a large building, and we've got floors, and RDH is quite from this. So to get from floor to floor, normally each floor of a building will be its own fire compartment, so you don't want to increase the risk of fire between it. So you would, if you've got a stairwell or a lift shaft running in the vertical plane of that building, it starts to give fire a path of travel up through the building. So what we tend to do in that case is locate our stairs and our lift shaft in its own fire compartment. So this wall, that is this construction here, will be fire rated. And not for the project we're looking at right now, but for some other projects, what it's saying is your path of travel, so the distance here that you might have to travel to the fire isolated stairwell, which will be in this part of the building. So what they're saying is the path of travel may only need to be measured as this distance, because once you get into this shaft or the stairwell, you're in a safe area. You're protected from the fire, and of course there will be fire doors leading into that area that will have the same FRL as the wall that it contains within, and of course they'll be closing behind you and all the rest of it. So that's what's called a fire isolated stairwell or fire isolated ramp, that can be known as well. So the other thing would be that either these walls would continue all the way up to the roof so the fire doesn't have an opportunity to jump like this, or you could have a ceiling here that was also fire rated like that. And that's how you're protecting, you're separating these areas. So they're separated at each floor level by some sort of fire rated construction, and the walls themselves are as well. So you're compartmentalizing internally within the building. So that will come into play in other buildings you will work with later on, but it doesn't come into play with our warehouse because we're just one compartment in the warehouse.
And remember that has to have mechanical ventilation? Yeah, 82. Beautiful. Where were we? Alright, so D2, I think I am in the right place. I just, had a little brain thing. Fire isolated stairways and ramps, what do you know? But not today. Non-fire isolated stairs and ramps. In a building having a rise of stories of more than 2, not us. But if we did, they would have to be constructed in accordance with D2.2, which is a stairway or ramp, including any landings that is required to be within a fire-resistant shaft, must be constructed of non-combustible materials. Now that list that we talked about were non-combustible materials that isn't there anymore. So that if there is a local failure, it will not cause structural damage to or impair the fire resistance of the shaft. So non-fire, according to D.2, and reinforced or pre-stressed concrete, steel no part less than 6 millimetres, or timber that has a finished thickness of not less than 44 millimetres and has an average density of not less than 800 kilograms per cubic metre and a moisture content of 12%, at a moisture content of 12%, and has not been joined by means of glue, which is flammable, unless it has been laminated and glued with that, or that glue. Can't pronounce it, apologies. Resicordinal formaldehyde or resicordinal phenylformaldehyde. I think that's how you pronounce it, but not the first word. I'm not sure that's right. Nonetheless. Now, something you'll learn next week with regards to timber. Timber is flammable. Obviously, you can burn timber. Everybody's had a bushfire. Everybody's had a campfire, is what I meant to say. But if you've got particularly thick wood, and you'll know this too, if the fire goes out, it doesn't burn all the way through. If it's particularly sizable, that's why the minimum 44 millimetres is good, because if a fire passes by, it gets charcoaled on the outside, but you can't burn that again, so it's like a protective layer. So if it's sizable enough, it actually isn't as flammable as you might think. But obviously if you stick glue in there too, then that ruins all of that. So that is probably still in your current issues about non-flammable materials.
2.3 is really talking about the non-isolated fire stairways and ramps. So if you've got the opposite of this, so your stairway is not contained within its own compartment and is not isolated, it's a non-fire isolated stairway or ramp, then if it has a rising stories of more than 2 floors. So this isn't up for this project, we've only got a rise up to a mezzanine level, which isn't even regarded as 1 story.
No.
So then it's saying that if you do have that rising, unprotected stairs, rising in stories of more than 2, then the stair construction itself needs to be non-flammable, non-combustible, of course, because people have to use it as their exit.
D 2.4, separation of rising and descending stair shafts. We don't have. Open air says. If it's required, external as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
If it's a required exit.
Because the old fire station in Barat, we used to use the yoga room, we got the second story outside of the building, which was an external staircase. But that was like made of building stuff.
Yeah, right. And it was probably
Yeah, it was only one.
probably well before these codes. Yeah. So there's some information here about smoke lobbies, which you can investigate as well. I don't think that means go where there is smoke. I think that's go where there isn't smoke. Sounds like a place where people hang out and have a jacket and a whiskey and club lounges and stuff. That's not what that is.
So generally being something that a safe place in the building is isolated again, and it's got extraction systems to get rid of the smoke. So in the Grenfell Tower in London, their fire isolated stairwell was supposed to have a ventilation system that got rid of all the smoke, and the ventilation system failed.
Oh.
The fire isolated stairwell was full of smoke.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oof.
You know, we're talking about the union building. Actually, when I recall, most of those buildings, like apartment unit blocks, don't have emergency exits.
No, they wouldn't have. Yep. Yep. And there wouldn't have been any, just the normal stairs.
No, and we lived in the 4th floor.
Wow. It's a long way to go. You got lucky, you're still here. 2.7, installations and exits and paths of travels. Installations. What are we talking about? Access to service shafts and service other than to firefighting or detection equipment as permitted in a deemed to satisfy section E must not be provided for a fire. Okay, I think
this is really talking about the
so it's getting
integrity of your compartmentalization.
Well, I don't think it's about penetrations, but I think it's about using those isolated stairways to get to places like plant rooms and things like that. It can't be your main. So service shafts and different equipment and things like that. You don't want, so I don't know if you've ever seen any movie with Bruce Willis in it. He seems to use lift shafts to get in or out or kill somebody, and there are usually doors to get in. So if that's your isolated fire stair and then you've got a hatch in it to get into the lift, kind of defeats the purpose about the whole process. So it's access to service shafts that they don't want to see interrupted into your fire related. They just don't get taken over by terrorism.
Seems to make a lot of sense when we think about it from the perspective of fire, but you'd be amazed how many times it's like actually in the design of the building and has to be removed because the fireys are the ones who pick it up. Because, you know, when we're designing a building, we're all about the space and making good use of the space. And if you've got a fire escape stairwell sitting down the back of the building, it seems like a great space to, you know, put services down there and access to them and, you know, all the rest of it. Telling us
So don't put gas or fuel services in the exit, in the path of travel, electrical meters, central telecommunication distribution boards, electrical motors. Whew, yeah, smart. And I suppose our fire hose reel and the fire extinguisher, they would be considered services as well, I suppose. Enclosure of space under stairs and ramps. So fire isolated stairs and ramps are not to be enclosed to form a cupboard or similar enclosed space. You don't want people hiding in there, and you don't want equipment in there that's flammable either.
You don't want the fire starting right under your stairwell.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
People often think that that's a great storage spot under the stairwell, but you know, if that is your isolated stairwell, then that's not a great storage spot because the fire could actually start in the stairwell.
Yeah, and the same for the non-fire isolated stairs and ramps. Space below a required non-fire isolated stairway is not to be enclosed to form a cupboard. That's probably worth making a note of. For D 2.8, enclosure of space under stairs and ramps, B.
So if you can do it on, so there's an unlet. The enclosing walls and ceilings have an FRL of not less than 60.
Oh yeah.
So what we tend to do with those spaces is line.
Grab the microphone too.
So if you've got, draw on my toe. Stairs coming down in section, and you have some sort of structure of that stairs, and you want to build storage in underneath our floor. You want to build storage in underneath this space. Then this lining here has to become fire rated to an FRL of 60, 60, 60. And of course the floor itself would have to have that. And we would hope maybe this is just concrete or maybe it's another floor below. So we are containing that area and it is being built in as a fire rated area.
Good thinking. So width of required stairs and ramps. A required stairway or ramp that exceeds 2 metres in width is counted as having a width of only 2 metres unless it is divided by a handrail or barrier continuous between landings, and each division has a width of not more than 2 metres. So that's not about saying the stairs have to be 2 metres wide. It's saying if the stairway exceeds 2 metres, the handrails are so far away that it's like you can only use one side. So this is about access. It's not necessarily about fire escape or fire safety anymore. It's about being able to move around safely and have a handrail to hold out in a public place. This is semi-public. So if you have a required stairway or ramp, so you have to provide a stairway or a ramp, if it's more than 2 metres wide, if you don't have a handrail in the middle, then that's all you've got. So if it's more than 2 metres, but you don't have a handrail at that 2 metre increment, then it doesn't matter how wide the stairs are, they may as well only be 2 metres because that's where the handrail is. I thought it was 1.8, but it looks like it's 2. So typically when you see really wide stairways out the front of schools, there'll be a handrail in the middle.
So this is one that's kicked in now with, a lot of churches and religious buildings in general. They tend to have like lovely steps going up to a grand entrance on the front, and often more recently they've been made to put the handrails up through the centre of it, which seemingly lots of brides have been complaining about because they want to get their lovely wedding photograph out on the steps of the church, and now they've got a lovely handrail right in the middle of the photograph. So if you think of it like that, that's basically what that clause is talking about.
My terrible drawing. Yep.
The handrail coming right down the street.
Yeah.
You know, wouldn't it be lovely if at the Opera House we just put handrails every 2 metres on the steps? Wouldn't that look gorgeous?
Oh, fabulous.
Yeah.
And expensive. Whoosh. Pedestrian ramps.
That's an exception building, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a whole other thing. So not required for us. We don't have a required stairway for the public or any of that. It's just that mezzanine and it's an exit. So there's no need for all that stuff. Don't have to worry too much. Just interesting. Pedestrian ramps. So we don't have any pedestrian ramps except for perhaps out the front door. So we've got people, the public, even office workers, whoever's coming there. They want to be able to get in. That's most likely where any little ramps up. We don't want steps up into the front. So a pedestrian ramp to a fire-isolated ramp might be substituted for an isolated stairway. It's not really what we're talking about here. Here we go. A ramp serving as a required exit must, where the ramp is also serving as an accessible ramp under Part D3, which we'll get to, must be in accordance with AS 1428.1. That's the disability code that we've been prattling off over and over and over, AS 1428. So what they're saying is if you've got a required exit and a ramp serving as that exit, it has to be constructed as per AS 1428. Make it slip resistant and tested. Fire isolated passageways we don't have. Roof as an open space we don't have. Here we go, goings and risers. So similarly, a stairway must have a flight of not less than 2 risers and not more than 18. So it's the same as class 1 and 10. And they've got the same 2R plus G matrix. And there'll be a table for that as well, unless it's permitted according to B and C. So here, B and C might be exceptions to this rule. So let's just check and see. In the case of a non-required stairway, the stairway must have not more than 3 winders in lieu of a quarter landing and not more than 6 winders. So it's a circular winding staircase. We don't actually have those. The going of all straight treads must be constant. That's still the same. But it's still considered constant if the variation between adjacent goings is no greater than 5 mil. So they've got a tolerance there, 5 millimetres, and the largest to smallest going within a flight does not exceed 10 millimetres. This is all very confusing. And C, where a stairway discharges to a sloping public walkway or public road. The riser may be reduced to account for the slope of the walkway of the road, or the quantity of 2R plus G may vary at that location. So remember we talked about how even the last step has to be the same as the first. They're just saying if this particular, in this instance, if it's out to a public walkway, slope or public road, then you could make a bit of an allowance out to that last step. These are the riser and going dimensions. They probably look quite familiar. I don't think they're any different as far as the minimum and maximums go, but don't quote me. The 190 looks familiar, the 355 looks familiar. That looks remarkably familiar. So I don't think the risers and goings are any different for these classes of buildings. So it'll be the same note against our stairs as you've got for the class 1 and 10 checklist. And the 2, there's stairs on the 2 as well, so it's the same. A few more minutes and then we'll have a break. Landings, we don't really have any landings, but if we were to have some, there'd be the minimum slope, the gradient, 1 in 50, like we've had for the residential as well. Not less than 750 millimetres long, and for a change of direction, and 500 millimetres from the inside edge of the landing. So exactly the same curve rate ratio that Sandra pointed out the other day. So no differences there. Non-slip resistant surfaces. Some information extra for 9A. Thresholds. The threshold of the doorway must not incorporate the step. That's the same issue as we were talking about the other day. Barriers to prevent falls. A continuous barrier must be provided along the side of a roof, a stairway, a floor, or any delineated path of access to a building. So we need a barrier to prevent falls, D2.16, along our floor, the mezzanine floor, and down both sides of the stairs. It's open. Actually, I think there's a wall there. Correct me if I'm wrong. The stairs. Let's have a look. So obviously the mezzanine would definitely have barrier. Yeah, so there's a gap between the wall and the near side of the stairs. Can you see that there? There's just ever so slightly, they've made some allowance there. Just a bit of a gap there. It's just got some framing, so there's going to be some tall, thin steel structure that has the skin attached to it, and there needs to be some room for that structure. So there's going to be a little bit of a gap between the skin and the edge of the stairs. So you'll need barrier on both sides of the flight of stairs. So it'll go up and along, and then on the near side we'll go up and do a little U-turn and then go back. Is everybody with me? Nope. Because it's Friday and it's 2:30.
So you have barriers on both sides of the stairs going up, and on one side of the stairs that barrier will end at the top of the stairs, on the other side it will return around, and then it will become a balustrade on the edge of the mezzanine.
Oh, yeah.
There you go. You just have to say it nice like Sandra does.
I think it's my I like to, I'll do the whole thing. Up and around.
So,
Hand gestures, yeah, that's it. And it returns like that.
I didn't draw that well at all. So this is the floor here. There'll be a gap where the stairs come out and go down. I think it's right up against the wall actually, now I think about it. So the stairs, you'll have balustrading all the way down, all the way up and around and across. And that will go back to the main wall. And then that's the mezzanine there.
So with the mezzanine, as soon as you put a wall that shows it from the warehouse, that becomes a room, not a mezzanine.
Yeah, it does, which we won't. So it's just a low balustrading.
Yeah.
So barriers are required.
So
D2.16.
Like a lot of warehouses would build mezzanine levels with no barriers,
Yeah.
and then they would use a forklift to lift the pallet up and store a whole pallet of goods up there. You're not actually allowed to do that anymore. And I have worked on a project where that's what they wanted to be able to do, use the forklift to load stock up there. And so we had to come up with barriers that were gates and had alarms on them, and they could be opened so you could lift the pallet in. But there was all sorts of warning signs and alarms that would go off if the gates weren't closed again. It was
big hassle.
difficult to design that. It really was a challenge. So this is the clause that's saying you have to have the barriers there.
So those requirements don't apply to the perimeter of a stage, the rigging loft or the loading dock or the like, or areas referred to in D.218, or retaining walls unless the retaining wall forms part of or is directly associated with a delineated path of access to a building. So when you make a big cut in the dirt and build a wall there, that's a big drop. So you're supposed to build a fence and stop people from falling over. In a class 1 and 10, that would be where it reaches a metre high. A barrier required by A, which we have, needs to be constructed in accordance with table D2.16A. So we've got barrier heights, so the stairways or ramps with a gradient of 1 in 20 or steeper, so that's our stairway, minimum 865, just the same as a normal stair balustrade, 865 millimetres above the nosing. And then it's got in front of fixed seating on a mezzanine, so we don't have fixed seating. It's not the orchestra where you can go in an entertainment centre and sit up on the fancy balcony and see over. That's a lower barrier, 700. We don't have that. And in all other locations, 1 metre. So it's the 1 metre one that we want.
So that's enough to make the barriers and balustrading needs to be 1 metre.
And then it just reminds the measurements from the transition zone and the parallel to the nosing. So that's missing off the checklist. You'll need to add that as a row. So table D2.16A. Now the next part of this table says barrier openings. So in the location of a fire isolated stairway, you have to have minimum 300 millimetre gaps. So remember it was 125, thank you, blank there. Minimum of 125 for class 1 and residence balustrade and handrails. The sphere is 125. For fire isolated stairways, that's not what we have, but for in that case, it's 300. For class 7 and 8, so 7 other than car parks and 8 which is warehouses, it's 150. In all other locations, 125.
Yep.
What are we? 7. We're 7, aren't we?
9.
So 6 and 7 we are. So 7 other than car parks. So that's us. So which is the office? Is it the 6 or the 7B? It's the 6, isn't it? Okay. So if we had stairs in the office, they would go back to being 125 spheres. But for the 7, it's 150. But the opening between rails must not be more than 460. So it's much wider. So 150 millimetre sphere must not be able to pass through the opening between the nosing line of the stair treads and the rail or between the rail and the floor of the landing, balcony or the like. So there's a little, and if you think about how stairs are constructed, that's so good. Take my trusty pen. So if you think about how stairs are constructed, and we kind of went through this the other day, Sandra, we talked about the nosing line. If you think about construction, you can't have a balustrade height without having something down the bottom. So they don't want a gap greater than 150 millimetres for that one. Must not be able to pass through the opening between the nosing line. There's our nosing line. And the line of the stair treads. Is that there?
So sometimes you can fit a sphere in this location here.
And the rail or between the rail of the floor of the landing or the balcony, or like the rail.
Yeah, so sometimes the balustrading will have a handrail.
Yep.
Which will draw up there.
Yep.
But often you buy them and they've got a bottom rail on them.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about.
Like
yeah. So it's 150 between these two, isn't it?
Yeah. So if you have a bottom rail that's up there, and then it will have some sort of,
Yeah.
could be anything.
And those are 150.
Well, they're the ones.
That one's the 4. So that's what.
460.
So normally it's a mid one. It just goes
Yeah.
halfway for warehouses.
Yeah. Or yes.
But this is the 150, isn't it?
Just have 3 rails like that,
Yeah.
and no verticals at all.
Yeah.
So this is the dimension here. Thank you.
Look at
This
us
is the
go.
dimension here.
460. Yeah.
Everyone got that? But what they're saying is that you can't be able to pass a sphere through here
150.
that's greater than the 150. You can't have a gap at the bottom going underneath between the threads and the bottom rail. And likewise, if your threads are open threads, you don't want the sphere to be able to go through here either. That's 125.
150.
125.
Oh, in all the locations. No, it's 150, right? So all our locations is other classes of buildings. Yeah.
So it increases to 150 for warehouse construction, so class 7 and class 8 buildings only.
So you'll often just see the 3, and they're usually just galvanized steel and don't spare any expense.
So there's still many balustrades on balconies around Darwin that are just 3 pieces of timber. Yeah. Similar to that. That's what they're saying. That style of construction of a balustrade is acceptable in the class 7 and 8, as long as you comply with the 150 sphere and the 460s between the rails. But in all other locations, we're back to the 125 sphere, just like we are for domestic construction. When I say domestic construction, everybody knows I mean residential, don't they? So, yeah.
There's just a bit of information about climbability. So I always get nervous when I see balustrading that has horizontal railings very high up. It's just a ladder. So all the good work we do, making sure that small children can't fit between them, they could simply just climb them. So that always makes me...
Front yard, and it's one of those 6-foot ones, and you can get all the way to the top. I dread the day he hooks himself over.
Yeah. So I know in the British building standards, the British and the Irish ones, you can't have any horizontal members. So in that 860 minimum height, there can't be anything horizontal there. And if there is, you have to measure from whatever is horizontal up further.
Yeah, wow.
So
Yeah.
if you've got, for instance, a balcony, and sometimes, remember yesterday we spoke about on the balconies, you might have to have the curb edging on the balcony to stop the water runoff, and that happens a lot in Darwin. And then they start the balustrading above that. To me, that's a horizontal climbable step. So your balustrade is really compromised because you're not achieving 860 above the horizontal. But let's go back to what it says here. It doesn't say that here.
So it's not required. For Class 7, it's not required. We don't have to be concerned with climbability. I expect that there's an expectation that this is not the kind of place where children are encouraged to go unsupervised. So it's not really so much of an issue. And then for everybody else, no horizontal or near horizontal, even says near horizontal. So even a bit of an incline might be considered near horizontal. It's a bit vague, but...
I think the balconies that have the metal braces, like the crosses, the braces.
Yeah, the children can get their feet in there quite easily.
Yep.
So we had a balcony at our house, and it had just the 3 timbers, which we thought were really, really dangerous. So when we were renovating the house 9 years ago, we just took them off. And ever since then, we've been meaning to put a balustrade on the balcony, but it still sits there without one. Which is
it's
a little bit worse than what we had before. So we keep all the doors locked and the keys hidden.
Oh dear. Alex is old enough now, you're right.
Old enough now to just not climb anything anyway.
So there's a bit of information about barriers constructed of wire. So you might have noticed a bit around town that we have these, it's like boating wire, tension boating wire. Certifiers would much rather we didn't use that ever. It's actually really difficult to measure the tension. The idea is that if you have them, a child shouldn't be able to pull the wires apart far enough to squeeze through. So most builders will install them 100 millimetres apart by consequence. They'll just do that automatically to really make sure that the 125 doesn't happen, but they also have to tension them, so they have little pneumatic mechanisms that pull and it clamps and the whole bit. Then you've got the winders on the end, the turnbuckles, but they slacken with age and then end up just hanging loose and things. So certifiers would much rather we didn't use them at all. Nonetheless, they are still out there. So there's a little bit of information about that and the diameter of the wire and the way the turnbuckles have to work and the clamping and the tension. Strain indicators, that's what you have to have, like a strain gauge. So there's a whole bunch of information on wire balustrading, which I'm just going to gloss right over. I think it must be time for a cup of tea. Yes, thank you. Goodness. We're almost there. All right, handrails. So except for handrails referred to in D1.8, let's just have a quick look at D1.8 before we get too carried away. For fixed platforms, walkways, stairways and ladders. So in commercial warehouses and commercial buildings and things like that, you often have stairways to places where people aren't supposed to go unless they're really supposed to go there. So plant rooms and boiler rooms and the roof, different places like that. You're not expected to provide handrails into those locations. You just need a way for the service personnel to be able to get there. So it might be a vertical ladder with a cage around it. There's no handrail for that. It might be an unusual fixed platform stairway where there's no expectation to provide a handrail. So remember, handrails are about having a nice height for continuous travel so that if you are impaired, you can get where you're going. But if you're not supposed to be going there and you're impaired, you don't need a handrail. So we're just about to cover how handrails are supposed to work, but if you are using a fixed platform, a walkway, a stairway, a ladder, or any going and riser, landing handrail or barrier attached to a machinery room, a boiler house, a lift, a machine room, a plant room and the like, or non-habitable rooms such as attics, storerooms and the like. So you remember sometimes you see those drop-down ladders that go up to an attic or a storeroom. If you have any of those situations, you don't need a handrail. You may still need safety barriers, but you don't necessarily need a handrail. So let's go back to our handrail part. So except for where it's referred to there, the handrail must be located along at least one side of the ramp or flight, located along each side if the total width of the stairway or ramp is 2 metres or more. And then it talks about Class 9B buildings. In any other case, fixed at a height not less than 865 millimetres measured above the nosing of the stair treads. So we've already talked about that. We can put that here. Total is 865. Continuous between the stair flight landings and have no obstruction on or above them that will tend to break a handhold. So remember I talked about the fact that you don't want to have to get to a column, take your hand away and then go around the column and start the handrail again, because you might fall while you let go. Like you might really be using the handrail to keep you upright. In a required exit, serving an area required to be accessible, designed and constructed in compliance with AS 1428. So if it's about accessible access, then it has to be designed specially. So that's the diameter of the handrail and the way it's ending and beginning and the way it's connected to the balustrading. So on at least one side, because it's not 2 metres wide. So just one handrail for this one. And it'll most likely be the top of the balustrading. We'll probably combine them. There's a fairly industrial looking material that we often use for handrails and balustrading, and this can be the top. It's called cattle rail because they use it to make cattle yards out of. So it's just a good shape for the top. So that might end up being something. Probably not, that's a bit fancy for these guys. They probably just use galvanised pipe, but, you know. And then they have those little ball joints on the top. Yeah, but that's quite good.
So often when we fix a handrail to the wall, this is the wall. So the handrail, if we want the handrail to have this section there, we will do a fixing that goes something like this. Because we really want to fix this to the bottom. You don't want to fix it that does that, because if someone runs their hand along it, every time there's a fixing, they're either going to chop their hand a little bit, or worst case scenario is that they let go and fall down the stairs. So the way of fixing handrails is quite detailed.
.2, swinging doors. A swinging door in a required exit or forming part of a required exit must not encroach at any part of its swing by more than 500 millimetres on the required width of the required stairway. So that's about making sure that you don't have a door that opens directly into the bottom of the stairs. So typically at the bottom of a set of stairs you need at least a metre square so that you can move out of the stairway and keep moving. You don't want to be stuck between the bottom of the stairs and the door to try and get out. When fully open by more than 100 mil on the required width of the required exit. And must swing in the direction of egress. So as you're moving, same as Sandra was saying, as the travel path moves, you've got to keep moving. So there's information about operation of the latch, Similar to what we were talking about with the fire exit, they need to be easy to operate. Accessible doors need to have nice, easy to operate latches as well. So a single hand downward action for accessible hatches. And it has to be located between 900 millimetres and 1.2 metres from the floor. So at a good height, not too low, not too high. Doesn't necessarily apply to rooms that serve as a vault, strong room or sanitary compartment, or within a sole occupancy unit. Doesn't apply to doors that are within Australian government security zones, banks, detention centres, mental health facilities or early childhood centres. And then it's got information about being immediately unlocked. So I don't know if you've noticed, but if you go into the disabled toilet here, you can switch the latch to closed, but if you open the door from the outside in that latched position, it opens. So it's immediately unlockable. Feel free to test it. So yeah, you can't actually be locked in. Hey?
Oh, that's in my mum's apartment as well.
Yeah?
You can open it from the inside without a key.
Yeah, right.
But then if the wind blows the door shut and you're outside, you're like, oh shit. I'm going to stuck outside.
That's not good. Re-entry from fire isolated exits. Doors of a fire isolated exit must not be locked from the inside as follows. I won't go into that, it's pretty obvious. Signs on doors. A sign to alert persons that the operation of certain doors must not be impaired, must be installed where it can be readily seen or adjacent to. So we've already talked about fire doors with signage, and we've kind of already covered this. It's a bit beyond the scope of this project, but if ever that was the case, this is where you would go. So fire safety door, do not obstruct, do not open, that sort of stuff. Protection of openable windows. So this one's not about fire, this one's about making sure that glazing or windows that are openable aren't so low down that small children can open them and fall out. So that's about keeping opening windows a bit higher off the ground. So a window opening must be provided with protection if the floor below the window is 2 metres or more above the surface beneath it, in a bedroom in a Class 2 or in a 9B early childhood centre. And then you need a barrier with a height of not less than 865 in front of it if that's the case, with no greater sphere hole than 175. For Class 7 and Class 8 buildings and parts of buildings containing these classes, the barrier required to an opening window in fire-isolated stairs or ramps and other uses is primarily for emergency purposes, excluding external stairwells and external ramps. So this is an exclusion for us. They're not really that worried about it. But it's the 300 millimetre sphere for us. It's a concession for timber stairways. And then I think that's the end of that section. So D3, that did not meant to happen. Access for people with a disability. General building access requirements. All right. So D3.1, buildings and parts of buildings must be accessible as required by Table 3.1 unless exempted by D3.4. So Class 1B, 2, there we go. So 6 has to be accessible to and within all areas normally used by the occupants. So this is D3.1 and it's the table to D3.1. Requirements for access for people with a disability. So it's got all the different classes and it says how accessible it needs to be. So for Class 6, it needs to be accessible to and within all areas normally used by the occupants. So every part of the office needs to be accessible. And it's the same for 7B. me wonder what that means for the mezzanine. I think there's an exception coming up, we'll see. A3.2, access to buildings. An access way must be provided to a building required to be accessible from the main points of a pedestrian entry at the allotment boundary. So you have to be able to get on the property. So say you're coming down the footpath in a wheelchair, motorised or otherwise, or on crutches, or however you're arriving. You have to be able to get from the footpath onto the property.
Even when there's no footpath.
Yeah.
So don't
Grass.
that, you know, if you're in an industrial area and there's no footpath and there's just a road and there's a grass verge, this doesn't apply. It does.
Yeah.
You still need to provide a path from the entrance, pedestrian entrance into your building.
Even if it's just grass, council verge, or dirt, as the case may be. From another accessible building connected by a pedestrian link. We don't have another building on the site, but that could be the building next door. Same issue. From any required accessible car parking space on the allotment. Now, Joanna already pointed out that there's a slightly wider parking space drawn on the sketch plan. You may have noticed it, because obviously the disabled car park has to be closer to the door than any other car park. So I'm predicting already that there might be an opportunity there for the disabled car parking, and this would be access from there through the front door. So you can't have stairs down from the car park. Not that that's likely, or up, but that's what they're trying to say for that. So D3.2A is appropriate. So I've just written access to reception, so that's required. So D3.2A. Now it says here in B, in a building required to be accessible, an access way must be provided through the principal pedestrian entrance and through not less than 50% of all pedestrian entrances, including the principal pedestrian exit entrance. Hoi. Babla. I think, no. Oh, do you want to do it? Yes? We're just going to trade because I'm getting tongue-tied. But Sandra was talking the other day about making sure that it's okay for disabled people to be able to come through the front entrance. So with older buildings that weren't originally accessible, people were adding accessible ramps to be able to provide for that, but they were having trouble making it fit with the front entrance, so they just put them to the side or around the back, and it's not really adequate.
So B is telling us that you are required to be accessible or have an access way provided through the principal pedestrian entrance and not less than 50% of other pedestrian entrances. And in a building of a total floor area more than 500 square metres, a pedestrian entrance which is not accessible must be located more than 50 metres. Must not be located more than 50 metres from an accessible pedestrian entrance. So, you know, everywhere you've got a pedestrian entrance, you have to not discriminate and ensure that nearby within the 50 metres you've got an accessible one. Number C there. So that is applicable to us.
Yeah, so B1 with the principal, we've only got one entrance, so that's...
Yeah, we've only got one, yeah, true. So, whoa, Wes does it to me all the time. Where the pedestrian entrance is required to be accessible and has multiple doorways. One, if the pedestrian entrance consists of not more than 3 doorways, not less than one of those doorways must be accessible. So I think this is more considering, you know, sometimes you walk up to a hotel and it's got like the main entrance and it's got 2 on either side and it's got a big facade. So really, where you've got 3 entrances, one of them must be accessible. If a pedestrian entrance consists of more than 3 doorways, not less than 50% of those doorways must be accessible. So it said before, if we had 3 doorways, not less than one of the doorways must be accessible. I think it's and or.
Not more than 3 doorways.
Oh, not more than 3 doorways, and then more than 3 doorways, there has to be 50%. The not more than and the more than confused me there. So you can probably realise that, you know, reading through this part of the NCC is much more complicated than reading through for Class 1, because Class 1 is just about your Class 1 building. This part of the NCC is trying to cover lots of different classifications of buildings, so it's half the process is just reading through and finding what is applicable to you and what isn't, which is exactly what we're doing. So for the purposes of C, this is D I'm on now, an accessible pedestrian entrance with multiple doorways is considered to be one pedestrian entrance where all doorways serve the same part or parts of the building, and the distance between each doorway is not more than the width of the widest doorway in that pedestrian entrance. And then the second part to that is a doorway is considered to be the clear, unobstructed opening created by an opening of one or more door leaves. It's pretty much telling us what a door is.
So when the door is open, the actual door itself isn't away, it's still within the opening. So if you think about being in a wheelchair and having your knuckles on the outside of the wheel moving the wheelchair, when the door leaves open, they take up a bit of space in the opening, and you have to be able to still have enough room to get all the way through.
So we talk about clear openings when we talk about accessibility. So it's not enough that you have, so if we look at the frame of the door here, it's not enough to measure from that part of the frame to there. You have to consider this depth of the leaf of the door as well, because that's your clear opening, provided that your door could actually swing to 90 degrees or greater. Of course, this is to avoid doorways that maybe can't swing completely out of the way. But the leaf itself will always give you an extra dimension on the frame. Parts of the building to be accessible. In a building required to be accessible, every ramp and stairway except for ramps and stairways in areas exempted by D.34, which we'll come to in a minute, must comply with. We've got a ramp that's fire isolated, a stairway that is fire isolated. Every passenger lift must comply with E3.6, and access ways must have passing spaces compliant with AS 1428.1. What I'm thinking here to myself is AS 1428.1 has lots of great diagrams that tell you exactly how this is. It's an Australian standard that is absolutely about disability accessibility, and I actually think it goes quite a few steps further than the NCC, and it's a little bit more onerous than what the NCC is calling for. The NCC is referencing it here, of course. So that would be my port of call if I was doing research on what accessibility that I needed. I would go to the 1428. We'll keep going here.
What they're saying, though, is if you've got two people that are in wheelchairs, every 20 metres there has to be somewhere they can pass if they're going in the other direction. If you were building something that was specifically for wheelchair access customers, it would be a completely different beast. This is just the bare minimum for the odd occasional crutched or wheelchair accessible customer. Really the bare minimum.
An intersection of access ways satisfies the spatial requirements for passing and turning space, and a passing space may serve as a turning space. So it's just, yeah, as Lisa said, it's just allowing that people pass by or turn around, that you're not completely caught if you're in the wheelchair.
Ramps are all caged in with balustrating and handrails, so it's hard to get space. Even got the carpet pile thickness.
Carpet pile thickness, yeah, that's in there.
On carpet.
I'm not going to continue to read all of these out one by one, but they are all different clauses that you must comply with. Exemptions, let's have a look at the exemptions. The following areas are not required to be accessible. An area where access would be inappropriate because of the particular purpose for which it is used.
That's quite general, isn't it?
That's quite general. An area that would pose a health or safety risk for people with a disability, and any path of travel providing access to an area exempted by AIRB. So I think in our situation and our project here, we can say that the mezzanine is going to be exempt. And so it can't be exempt because it's up the stairs and people in wheelchairs can't go there. That's not a reason for it to be exempt. No. What it's saying here is the area will be inappropriate to use for the particular purpose for which the area is used. So we can say the area is being used for the storage of, large boxes of electrical goods. The reality of that situation is that someone that's disabled is probably not going to be able to carry that sort of storage goods and store it and stack it anyway. So giving them access to a storage space like that isn't really going to assist them. And
that's not to say that we couldn't have somebody who is in a wheelchair working in a facility like this.
No.
They could operate a specially operated forklift,
yeah.
no problem.
Yeah.
But they wouldn't need to go on the mezzanine perhaps.
There's no reason to say that they couldn't pack boxes with
Yep.
smaller boxes, you know, if it was a packing facility or serve a customer. But the reality of a mezzanine storage area is that you're probably going to have everything packed up. You're not going to be doing the packing up there. You're going to just already packed big boxes, storing them up there. Now, be careful with exemptions for this. The building certifiers do not like giving exemptions for this because, as I said before, a lot of this stuff falls under the Disability Act and it leaves themselves open to being sued for discrimination. So, very difficult to have a certifier agree to an exemption unless it's very impractical to have it accessible. Accessible car parking. So, subject to B must be provided in accordance with Table D 3.5. A Class 7A building, is that us?
No,
We're 7B. Will be required to be accessible and car parking area on the same allotment as a building required to be accessible. I go around in circles with this sometimes. So B, accessible car parking spaces need not be provided in a Class 7A building. Let me just think about this for a second.
7A.
So all I'm going to say is we're going to go straight to the table and work it out from there. So we're not a 7A, so we're not exempt from this.
7A is a car park.
Yeah. Oh, so it is a car park. Okay. The other thing is telling you the AS number here that your car parks must be complied with. So this is an AS Australian standard number that you'll want to be referring to when you have a disabled accessible car park designed in accordance with.
Make a note of that or write down on your checklist.
Right on your AS 2890.6.
Because we'll go to that just to find out how to design the car park space that's going to be disabled.
Need not be designated where there is a total of not more than 5 car parking spaces, so as to restrict the use of the car parking space only for people with a disability. So that's quite good to know. So if you've less than 5 car parks in the entire car park, you need not designate that space for someone with a disability. So you don't need to line mark it. Well, you probably would line mark it anyway, but you don't need to put the disabled accessible line marking on the space, so it remains undesignated as a disabled car park. It would still have to have the same width and the same dimensions as a disabled car park, but it just means that anyone can use it. It doesn't have to be kept free. We're not really used to seeing that. We're used to seeing them line marked. I've never used that clause.
Yeah, because we've got 10 easily.
But I suppose if you've only got 5 car parks in an area, in a small business or something like that, and you know you maybe don't have room for any more, it is a complete waste having a car park there or sitting all day that nobody else can park in if there's if there's nobody with
Yeah, when you make it
that needs
5,
it.
yeah.
Yeah. So car parking spaces for people with a disability. Let's have a look here, and this is the table. Table D 3.5. So write that down, Table D 3.5. This is what you're going to reference to get your figures from. So in a Class 6, in a car park that has up to 1,000 car parking spaces, we need to provide 1 space for every 50 car parking spaces or part thereof. So how many spaces do we have? How many did we say we needed for planning? 10. 10. And how many do we have on the tablet?
9
point something.
So it was 9 point something and we rounded it to 10, yeah. No, we got rounded to 10. How many provided? 10. So there is 10 there. So your disabled accessible car park can count towards your car parking calculation for planning. That's something to note. We actually was one of the questions our students emailed off to the planner last year, so we absolutely can. So we can have 1 disabled accessible car park and 9 standard car parks, and that meets our 10 for planning. However, the dimensions of that one will be slightly different. So that's for our Class 6, and then we've got our Class 7, which isn't telling me anything. Oh, there it is. So for a Class 7 building, 1 space for every 100 car parking spaces or part thereof. So, we'll be well covered in there. Well, they're both saying one is for 1 space for every 50 and one is for 1 space for every 100. So 1 space will cover us for both. in our mixed use. So of course, if you were in any doubt here, you always use the default that gives the benefit to the greater amount of disabled car parks. So we would use the office one there as a minimum. Signage in a building required to be accessible, braille and tactile signage complying with specification D 3.6 must incorporate the international symbol of access or deafness as appropriate in accordance with AS standard 1428.1. Again, 1428.1. You're going to really need to have a look at this Australian standard when you start to design, because it will dictate a lot of what you need to put on your drawings. So, braille signage for sanitary facility, except a sanitary facility within a sole occupancy unit in a Class 1B or a Class 3 building. So, yes, obviously if it's within someone's residence, they don't need a sign to say this is the toilet, but in all other buildings they do, and that sign needs to have braille and tactile signage to go with it. And a space with a hearing augmented system. I don't really know what that is. Do you, Lisa?
Oh yeah, but sometimes you see them and you can plug headphones in and get the instructions directly into headphones, like ATMs have them and things like that.
Yeah,
so
right.
If you've got a wayfinding system, it can sometimes be an app on a phone that goes through your own personal headphones, or it can be a device you're given when you go into the building to give you directions about where to go, and it has a GPS, so it knows where you are and it can tell you what's closest and things like that. So braille signage, there's a whole massive, brilliant profession about this stuff. So conferences, big conference centres, big auditoriums, stuff like that. It's very complex, Supreme Court buildings, Parliament House buildings, government libraries, tourist centres where the general public are going. They're not familiar with the place, they've never been there before, and they've got to find their way around. Wayfinding is a complete profession all of its own. It's terrific. And the braille signs, they have to be, near the edge of walls, not tucked in behind doors that get propped open and things like that. They have to be a good height, and it's great. I mean, some museums do such a terrific job, particularly with that kind of thing. It's brilliant. Just a note with A1A sanitary facilities. So the braille stuff is where you have to have it in a sole occupancy unit for a 1B or a 3, but no other sole occupancy unit, so not in a 2. Because 1B and 3 are public sole occupancy units,
right,
like boarding houses or hotels. So you have the tactile indicator, the braille signage there, but not in private Class 2 buildings. And there's an art about, the same as we were talking about the other day, of signage, contrast, text sizes for the lifts, don't use the lifts, that sort of stuff. It's that specification.
So AS, 1428 will give you a lot of that.
Yeah. And it's normally outsourced to a contractor, and you just expect them to do it.
Yeah, but you do need to put out your documentation. Again, this will be something that might appear on your door schedule. What signage needs to go on that door. It could be just as simple as signage required. So where do we need signage? So you need to identify each door, as in an exit and the level. The signage must include the international symbol for deafness. And where does that happen? In a room containing hearing augmented systems. Signage in accordance with that must be provided for accessible unisex facilities. Must also be identified the ambulant accessible sanitary facilities. Do we know the difference between that? I think we just spoke about this the other day, didn't we?
Yeah.
The ambulant disabled toilet as opposed to the accessible toilet, which is designed for wheelchair use. And where a pedestrian entrance is not accessible, directional signage must be incorporated to show the person where the nearest accessible entrance is. Makes sense, doesn't it? And F there is where a bank of sanitary facilities is not provided with an accessible unisex sanitary facility, directional signage must incorporate the international symbol to show the nearest location of sanitary facilities. So if the facility isn't provided, you have to have a sign to say where it is provided. Hearing augmentation system.
Yeah.
So it's just telling us what it is
Class
really.
9B and auditoriums and
Okay.
offices and things, yeah.
So it's required in those buildings, not really applicable to our project. Tactile indicators. Again, probably not our, where are they required? Let's talk about that. For a building required to be accessible, tactile ground surface indicators must be provided to warn people who are blind or have a vision impairment that they are approaching a stairway, an escalator, a passenger conveyor or moving walk. So I suppose those level escalators that don't actually go up a level. Ramps other than a fire isolated ramp. Step ramp, curb ramp or swimming pool ramp. And in the absence of a suitable barrier, an overhead obstruction less than 2 meters above floor level other than a doorway. And an accessible meeting a vehicular way adjacent to the pedestrian entrance of the building. So when you get to the edge of the curb, one before you step out onto the road. So do we all know what the tactile indicators are? The little circles, little bumps. Do we have them here?
Yep.
We do at the top of the stairs.
Yeah.
So anyone who doesn't know what they are, look at the top of the stairs. They're little bumps, and if you're walking along, it just gives you the ground is not flat anymore. And so if you're obviously blind or are vision impaired, it gives you an idea that there's a change about to happen. You're approaching a stairs, you're approaching a curb, or the like, and it gives you some warning of that.
And there's a whole Australian standard for it.
Yeah, again, it's in
It's quite
1428 is all in there about what you need to do, how big they need to be. So we do need to provide these on our documentation. So anywhere that is needs to be accessible, we need to show where the tactile indicators need to be provided. Otherwise, our drawings don't comply. So B of that, tactile ground surface indicators must comply with sections 1 and 2 of 1428. Hospital for the aged, nursing home for the aged, as you can imagine, this will be even more onerous. Class A age building or Class C9 building need not comply with A1 and V if the handrails incorporate a raised dome button in accordance with the requirements for handrails and stairs. Don't really quite know what that is. I suppose they're quite yes, yeah.
And they've got a little button there.
Yeah.
So as the hand comes down, it bumps into the button and it lets you know that
you're at the end.
Of the railing.
Yes, I do know them. Yeah, yeah. So 1428 has lots of details about how the handrail should be. So either the handrail covers back around and goes back into the wall, or it can have a little bump like that and go right down. It can't just end. You can't just somebody walking down the stairs and they don't know if they're at the bottom or not at this point in time, and then the handrail just ends. There's lots of different ways that we have to do it for commercial buildings. D 3.9. Do we need to do D 3.9?
No,
I don't think so.
Class 9B buildings only.
Class 9 only. Swimming pools, I don't think so.
No.
There's nothing in our ramps. We don't have any ramps, I don't believe, other than for accessibility. Glazing on access way.
Yeah.
What's the next one we've got on the list?
Glazing and access way. You have the list.
Oh, sorry.
There you are.
Whoop.
I think that's mostly taken care of.
Yes, I think so. So we're going to go into E1 now.
That was epic.
So, go back over here. Please work for me.
The E1 firefighting equipment. E1.3 fire hydrants. Remember the other day when we were talking about fire hydrants, we said you only need to have a fire hydrant where there is a fire brigade available to use them. So if your building is in a location where there's no fire brigade to use the hydrant, not a lot of point having one.
Funnily enough, that's lots of locations in the Northern Territory.
Lots of them, yeah. So you might be building a design somewhere out at Yuendamu. No hydrant required.
So E1.3 fire hydrants. The fire hydrant system must be provided to serve a building having a total floor area greater than 500 metres squared. Do we have a building greater than 500 metres squared? We do. Okay, so that is a minimum requirement, 500 metres squared. I'd really like you to write that on your checklist. So anywhere where your building is greater than 500 metres squared, you do need fire hydrants. And also, as Lisa just said, where the fire brigade is available to attend the burning building. The fire hydrant system must be installed in accordance with another Australian standard number there, except for a Class 8 and electricity network substation. And it has its own compliance requirements, as you can imagine. It cannot be connected to the town main supply if
Are you saying that?
this second part B. It must be installed in accordance with the Australian standard.
Oh, no, that's
if
where it needs
yeah,
not comply if it
cannot be.
Yeah.
Okay, so if it
If
cannot
it
be
can-
connected, so your fire hydrant system should be connected to the main supply. That's what was holding me up there. I was like,
Yeah.
no,
Wait a
it
second.
should.
Yeah. Or if you can't get an hour's worth of water storage.
Yeah.
So don't bother connecting it then either.
So, and also the second part to that is where internal fire hydrants are provided, they must serve only the story on which they are located, except in a sole occupancy unit. And so in a Class 2 or 3 building or Class 4, the building may be served by a single fire hydrant located at the level of egress from the sole occupancy unit. So those are just for sole occupancy units. B, if not more than 2 stories in a Class 5, 6, 7, 8 building may be served by a single fire hydrant located at the level of egress. That is us, because we're not more than 2 stories.
And there should be a proposed location in the drawing.
Aha. Or in red, blue, green, maroon.
No, on the drawing. Yep.
There's no, yeah, there's no 500.
I don't think we did a fire hydrant, but we've got fire extinguishers.
Maybe it's on the 5 plan, hang on.
Extinguisher. Oh, yeah, no fire hydrant there. So we're going to add them.
Yeah.
Do you normally have it externally? Yeah, normally.
We just say just right there next to that door.
Yep.
So we're going to add it over this side, somewhere just around here. So fire hydrants, I don't know if people know, when I used to think of fire hydrants, I used to think of those ones we saw in the American movies, you know, the big red ones that cars sometimes drive into and the water goes everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
Are they on the old movies? Maybe you're not old enough for those. But they're not. They're little discs that sit down flat on the surface of the ground, and they got FH written on them. However, just more recently,
And I have a little lid of them.
all of the schools in Darwin have been given big fire hydrants that sit out of the ground. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So they're up and they sit. We've got white ones with dual connectors. We just
Yeah, just the whole ground here with the FH.
yeah, circle or triangle.
A triangle. Yeah.
And then with
Just point to the wall. Yeah, FH. Want me to?
Oh, yeah. Do you want to sketch it up on that?
Mm.
Turn over your board.
What have we got so far? Something here. FH. Often portable.
Okay, has everybody got their fire hydrant drawn onto their site plan? I'm going to keep moving on because I really want to get to the end before the end of the day. Come back on. Has everybody looked up and saw where that was located before I take it off? Yep, all good? Yes, I think we are. Yep. So the next thing we have to look at is the location for fire hose reels. Make sure I didn't skip anything there. No, that was just with the hydrant. It does not apply to class 2, 3, 8, 9 classrooms. So that's nothing to do with us. A fire hose reel system must be provided to serve the whole building where one or more internal fire hydrants are installed. Or where internal fire hydrants are not installed to serve any fire compartment with a floor area greater than 500 square meters. So we do need them because of this part of the clause here.
So AS 2441, soft fire hose reels.
Just make a note of that, AS 2441.
And as far as I know, the standard fire hose reel hose is about 30 metres long. Is that right? I'm going to put a note on the drawing.
Oh, yep.
Can I just say something about the fire hydrant?
Yep. It's on this one, isn't it? Do you want to go to the next one?
We shouldn't really put it in that location there,
All right.
because then if the fire is in that location, shouldn't you put it near the fence area?
That's a long way to go to get all the way down the back here.
Yeah,
You do want to put it in a location where, you know, it can extend to the most part of the building. I forget exactly how long the fire is.
there, then
How,
the
Yeah,
firefighters can't use it.
mm-hmm,
They
true.
shouldn't be out here.
there probably is one on the street actually.
Yeah.
Did I put that on the drawing? I think there's a fire hose across the corridor. There is actually. From memory, there's a fire hydrant just here on the street.
Right, there is one.
Don't quote me, but we do cover this again later, and I remember it being there.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, this isn't a very good question.
Yeah.
What's that you've just drawn? Is it
This
the,
is a little, what a fire hose reel might look like in
what's the abbreviation now?
SHR,
SH.
fire hose reel. So it's on the inside.
And is within 4 meters of an exit.
Yeah.
So you want to be thinking about how close you are to the exits here.
So make sure that's on your checklist. Required and within 4 meters of an exit.
A fire hose rails must be located internally, externally, or in a combination to achieve system coverage as specified in AS 2441. So again, that's a reference to the standard. You can have a look there and see how often they need to be provided.
I think if you were to look at the floor plan, that fire hose reel wouldn't reach to the back of the office. You'd have to have extinguishers back there anyway. It's like a combination of different things that cover the area.
Yeah. Now, as designers, you're not actually expected to know all of the ins and outs of the fire compliance with Australian standards. There's fire engineers who do know all of that. However, what will happen generally in Darwin on building like a warehouse or something like that is you can put these things on, put one fire hose reel on, put one fire hydrant on, put them on your drawings. Don't omit them because you're trying to comply with the NCC. Give it to the building certifier. He will in turn send it to the fire department here, who will do a check on it. Guarantee you, if they're not happy with where you've located things, they will come back to you straight away with a markup and ask you to move them into those locations. So it's not something you're expected to know exactly how long every hose reel is or how many of these you need on each site. Just be aware that they are required on commercial buildings and do make an attempt to put them on your documentation. Don't completely leave them off. And then when they send them through, they'll refine your design for you. They're the experts. The fire hose reel system must have fire hose reels in accordance with the standard, where they're located. So provide fire hose reels to serve the story for which they're located. Did I just read this before? Okay, let's go back down there. We did.
I know, it probably seems like because the hydrant is the same. You can't have a hydrant on one floor that's supposed to
Serve another floor, yes. So it's one per floor. Just note that, one per floor.
And that E is about coverage. So a one or a combination of the following. And then there's fire hose, reels, and system coverage. So it's about paths of travel. So the hose has to go around corners and things. You can't just put the fire hose reel and then create a line of sight and think that the fire hose reel will automatically get to those places.
Where the normal water supply cannot achieve the flow and pressures required, you may have to use a pump, water storage facility. In many buildings in Darwin, swimming pools are used as a water storage facility for the purposes of fire extinguishing, or both pump and water facility. Okay, next one is about sprinklers. So when might we need a sprinkler system? Let me just make sure I'm still on track here. So sprinklers, oh, this keeps jumping on me, so sorry. Sprinkler system must A, be installed in a building or part of a building when required by table 1.5, E 1.5, which we're about to look at. So in an open deck car park, in a multi-classified building, electrical network substation, talking about open deck car parks again there, class 3 building, residential aged care, we can see why we might need sprinklers there. In a class 6 building, so they are sometimes required in a class building, in fire compartments where either the following apply: a floor area of more than 3,500 or a volume more than 21,000. So we're talking large multi-story office buildings here that may require fire sprinkler system. Class 7A is about open deck car parks. It's not mentioning 7B at all, so I think we're pretty much in the clear here. So you can say for sprinklers they're not required. However, just be aware that there is this table in the NCC and you may have a project at one point that does require them. And this is where you might come to find that out. Portable fire extinguishers. Am I right on this?
Little note next to there for the A, B, and E. So we discussed types of fire extinguishers last week, and we
Okay,
had a look at
great.
the list and we googled what different types of fire extinguishers do what.
Okay, fantastic.
So it'll be an A, B, and E, but there'll probably be in the table which ones you
Let's
have to have.
have a look.
So it just has, just got it up there.
It tells us here. Okay.
So that was class 2. So this is the table here to decide whether we have to have them or not.
So table, that's 1.5, but it'll be further down. So we're going to go straight to the table E 1.6, which will tell us whether or not we need portable fire extinguishers. You did have a look at this. You did have a look at this last week when we looked at the class 2 building.
And then it's got the different risks.
Yep. So general provisions, class 2 to 9 buildings do require this. So you have to, would you like to talk to that?
Yeah, so just the A and E, fire risks associated with emergency service switchboards. F for if you've got cooking oils and fats in kitchens, which we don't have. And B for excessive risk locations where flammable liquids in excess of 50 litres are stored. We don't have any fuel or anything like that, so A and E will suit us. And to cover class A fire risks normally occupied in fire compartments less than 500 square metres. So it's the A mostly that we want all the time, and then we get the E as a bit of a bonus.
So we'll go back to the site plan there. We're going to mark this up on the site plan, and we are going to provide a location for our fire extinguishers. Oh, are we on the wrong one?
Oh, you're right. So probably here somewhere. A, B, and E is automatically what you'll get. And we probably want one maybe here
Yeah.
in the office. Same, A, B, and E. How's that sound? It's got AS2444. Seems like a pretty good proposal to me. Guys are doing so great.
Okay, I'm going to keep going. So we've got our fire extinguishers in. Fire sprinkler systems. Do we need one or not? We already decided not for sprinkler systems. No, what I meant to say was for smoke detection systems.
So the next that's E2, I think, is that right?
Yeah, E. I don't have a number here. I'm not going to go through fire control rooms.
So I think E2 is smoke.
Ah, yes, that's where I'm looking. So general requirements for smoke detection systems. A building must comply with B, C, and D. Let's see what they are. Yeah, I'm not really following this. So it really talks to us about the fire. Yeah, this is what we spoke about before about the fire isolated stairway. So it's often they're fitted with ventilation for extraction of smoke.
It's not applicable.
It's not applicable in this because we don't have fire isolated stairs.
Yeah, so on the checklist it says smoke detection system, automatic or sprinklers plus fire isolated stairs. I've got NA, not applicable, next to mine on the checklist.
Basically, because we don't, but as we've mentioned earlier, if you do have those fire isolated stairwell, we have to, we need to know what we're going to do with the smoke that may be captured in those areas because they are a place of refuge for people in the event of a fire.
Just not a big enough building to get there.
And realistically, if you're dealing with a big enough building to get there, hence why I don't particularly know this section of the NCC particularly well, is because you would have on a bigger building, a large multi-story office building, hospital buildings, you will have a fire engineer who's looking into all of this for you. You'll certainly have mechanical engineers who'll be looking at all of the detection systems as well throughout the building and how the ventilation is working in the building. I'm going to go right down to E4.
Yeah. Way to go. Just click on the link on the left now.
Oh yeah.
It seems to be working today.
Yep.
100?
Let me see. Hold on, I might be able to just get it from here. I should have done that before.
So skipping to E4, which is visibility. We'll pass the verification method. Yeah.
Visibility, exit signs, warning systems. So again, we're back to signage really and emergency lighting requirements. So emergency lighting system must be installed in every fire isolated stairway. So we don't have one. In every story of a class 5, 6, 7 and 8. Now we do have a class 6, so we do need emergency lighting in our class 6 component of our building. And class 7, so it is required. So where is it required? In every passageway, corridor, hallway or the like that is part of the path of travel to an exit. In any room having a floor area more than 100 square metres. Do we have any rooms more than 100 square metres?
Yes.
Or just our warehouse itself. That does not have an open, so in any room of 100, a floor area of more than 100 square metres that does not open to a corridor or space that has emergency lighting, or to a road or open space, so we do open up onto an open space, and in any room having a floor area more than 300 square metres. In every passageway, corridor, hallway or the like having a length of more than 6 metres, but that's a 2, 3 and 4, so that's not all.
Done that already for our
Yes. and sole occupancy unit is not. So you can bring that over.
Yes, all right.
So let's just go straight to our floor plan and mark up where we might think we might need emergency lighting. And we're going to go in here. What would you like to do on that one? Yeah.
Can you rotate it for me?
What's that?
90 degrees.
Okay, clockwise. There we go. Oh, we might go again.
Upside down, Lovely, thank you.
Oh,
All
we
right.
got it the right way up.
So this was our required exit.
Both of them were required exits, weren't they?
So it's like a rectangle with a shaded exit. This was our required exit here. Exit. So we want that same green illuminated signage, don't we? And this was a required exit too, wasn't it?
Mhm. Nope.
This is not.
No, we don't want to attract people to use that as an exit. So not a required
Write that
exit.
down.
3 exits should be sufficient. Keep us compliant. So on your checklist, can you also write a note required as per E 4.2b? And then the Australian standard that covers exit signs and lighting is AS 2983.1. And it's spec, SPEC, spec E 4.8.
They just have extra detail about the illumination and the whatever the little man goes and everything.
So exit sign must be clearly visible to the person approaching the exit and must be installed above or adjacent to each of the following. A door providing egress from the story, a door of an enclosed stairway, passage or ramp at every level of discharge onto a road or open space. So obviously if you've got a big stairway coming down to the building, you don't want to have an exit sign on level 3. Nobody's going to exit onto level 3 and then realise they're stuck on level 3. The exit sign is only on the level, the ground level, where they can exit onto a road and actually exit the building. And on a horizontal exit, it may be there.
The one we've got between the
two compartments.
Yeah.
Yeah. If it's identified as a horizontal exit, it isn't always. And again, that's something you would have an engineer assisting you with to identify what is and what isn't a horizontal exit. So doors serving as or forming part of a required exit in a story required to be provided with emergency lighting. You must also have exit signs over those doors. Direction signs. If an exit is not readily apparent to a person occupying or visiting the building, then exit signs must be installed in appropriate positions in corridors, hallways, lobbies and the like, indicating the direction to a required exit.
Can you see our little direction sign just there? See that? Everybody see that? I'm standing right away. See the directional sign in the middle of the room? So there's no exit in the middle of the room. It's just a way to turn right.
If everybody runs that way, and they're going, where do we go, where do we go? Because there's a fire just here at the door, then pointing in the right direction.
It's all smoky, that'll be our artery light. So we'll probably go towards it. So once we get there, we can go, oh, we're not quite there yet, but it'll tell us which way to go.
Mm-hmm. And you'll note that there's an exit sign over the doorway there. And again, we have the little man running in the direction that we want to go in down the corridor. Okay, I'm not going to read all these exemptions. I'm just going to keep going with what we actually need. Sound and intercom systems for emergency purposes. Again, it's not applicable to us. If you've got 25 metres or more, you have to be up there. 9B is not applicable to us.
So the specifications, that's the one we just said, spec 4.8. So there's a few details about these illuminated signs and how they're supposed to work. Just make a note that that's there.
Just as an idea, like, the mezzanine, shouldn't there be a sign to indicate, like...
Yes, you are travelling down the stairs, yes, there should.
Idea.
Absolutely. It would probably be more like a directional sign, because it's not,
There's no exit
exiting
to the outside
to the outside there, but you are directing someone down the stairs and out into the warehouse.
Yeah.
And then when they get to the warehouse, on that lower level, they'll be able to see the door exit signs, our actual
So they might
exit
actually
signs.
have to hang the directional sign from the roof, because if you put it too high, people won't see it, and the roof is going to be really high above that mezzanine. Even though they're up there, they're halfway up there, it's still a very tall roof, so probably hang it down to this kind of approximate height. Yeah, good point. Maybe pop that on the mezzanine as well. Just fix that on the
Directional sign.
Yeah.
Did they put it there?
Yeah, above the stair landing.
Above the
Yep.
stair landing?
Yep.
Without having to hang it down that far.
Yeah.
Okay, we're on to health and amenity.
And so do you mark with the same?
Yep.
So for health and amenity, we have the same, much the same issues as we had in the wet areas and waterproofing that we had before. The only difference is in a warehouse building like this, it's unlikely, well, we may have a shower. What do we have in the bathrooms? We do have a shower room. So we've got one shower room, we've got two WCs and a wash hand basin. And the wet area requirements for those are exactly the same as they were in our residential type construction, same type of wet area details. So they are required, if you could write that on your checklist, and as you can see, are required in accordance with table F1.7, which I'm trying to find. 1.7. And here we go, we've got our table F1.7, which we went through yesterday for the Class 2 building. And it basically states exactly the same thing. So if you can copy over exactly the same thing from your checklist from yesterday to that part of the checklist for the Class 3. So things like your wet areas required 150 millimetres above any vessel. For the shower area, if it's in waterproof floor in the shower area, including the hobber set down. So water resistant walls in the shower to be not less than 1800 millimetres above the finished floor level of the shower. So 150 mil above the other, the wash hand basins, and 1800 millimetres above the finished floor level in the shower. And of course the floor must be waterproofed as well. Any questions on the waterproofing? Because I'll move on if we don't, because we did cover it quite well yesterday. We don't have any baths or laundries to be dealing with here. A little bit less on the wet areas. The waterproofing of the building, the damp-proof courses under the slabs, and the waterproofing of the walls and roofs is exactly the same as it was for yesterday. Nothing changes there, even though it's a warehouse. We'll go to F2.2. This is for the provision of sanitary facilities then. We haven't had this before. So how do we calculate how many, WC toilets that we need and other facilities in a commercial building? So the calculation of number of occupants and facilities. The number of persons accommodated must be calculated in accordance to D 1.13 if it cannot be determined more accurately by other means. So we looked at D 1.13 for the floor area, and how many persons did we have?
So it was 21 for the warehouse, wasn't it? How many was it for the office again? 9? Yeah, 9.
921, we've got 30 people, potentially. Unless the premises is predominantly used by one sex, sanitary facilities must be provided on the basis of equal numbers of male and female. In calculating the number of sanitary facilities to be provided, a unisex facility required for people with a disability may be counted as once for each sex. I think we read a bit of this yesterday, didn't we?
Yep.
Okay, so we're going to go through that again. Facilities in class 3 to 9 buildings. Except where permitted, separate sanitary facilities for males and females must be provided in buildings that are class 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that's us. So separate facilities for male and female, but we'll read a little bit further into that. If not more than 10 people are employed, a unisex facility may be provided instead of separate for each sex. So if you've less than 10 people, one toilet, unisex, but must be accessible.
So we're treating class 6 with our 9 people and class 7B with our 21 people.
If the majority of employees are one sex, not more than 2 employees of the other sex may share toilet facilities if the facilities are separate by means of walls, partitions and doors to afford privacy. Employees in the public may share the same facility in 6 and 9B buildings other than the school or early childhood centre. So you have to calculate the number required for the employees and for those required for the public. So it has to be an addition of both. Adequate means of towels and other sanitary facilities for females must be supplied, and separate sanitary facilities for males and females need not be provided for patients in a ward area. Oh, okay. So 9A, not us. 9B, not us. 9B for theatres and sporting venues, of course, need to have lots and lots of sanitary facilities because they get huge crowds of people and lots of queues. So there's a whole separate section for them. So here's our table we want to look at for the allocation of sanitary facilities. So class 3, 5, 6, this is us, and this is 7 here. So for the class 6, we've got less than 10 employees, so we said we could provide one unisex for that part of the building. And then for 7, we've got between 1 and 20, isn't it? What did we say? 21. Oh, we're greater than 20. But not. We can say that we've got.
So it's less than 20
less than
males,
20 males and yeah, evenly
males and females. So we've got. Can't split a person in half. We've got 11 and 10, if you like.
So we go between 1 and 20 and 1 and 15. So we would need to provide one toilet, and so this column is the number that you need to provide for closet pans, for urinals, so between 1 and 10 for urinals. Staff.
10 male employees.
Yeah, but where's it telling me the number I need to provide of urinals?
The next one where it says 0.
The number is there. Sorry, I can't see the headings. So 0. So we're just going to stick with the 1WC here. And then up here we've got wash hand basins and we need one per toilet. However, in our, I think in this case we've only provided that one toilet in the warehouse. So I think we may be better off combining our figures.
I don't know. I've got male times 1. Female
That's what we've just worked out, yeah.
Plus 1 accessible.
Yeah. So we're pretty much, I suppose we've identified that we're non-compliant because what the table is telling us is that for the warehouse part of this project we need one male, one female with a toilet in each, and we need a wash and basin. And for the office component we need one unisex, but at least a minimum of one of these facilities has to be accessible as well. So if we look at our floor plan, we can see that in the office area we've got a bathroom here that looks to me to be accessible. Maybe it would need to be checked. might look actually slightly on the small side for me as an accessible tiny. Let's see, can we bring it up a bit? Oh my gosh, we've got to get a new mouse. I can't handle it. Okay, so we are assuming that this is of size that is accessible. I would really want to check that if that was me. The dimensions that you need for an accessible bathroom are all in 1458, and they're all in there. They've got layouts in there, and so you'd want to be checking your drawings to say that, you know, if we were compatible here. So we are required to provide, make a note of that, 1 male, 1 female in the warehouse. Well, that's 1 by WC and 1 by WHB, wash hand basin. 1 female, 1 by WC plus WHB, wash hand basin, as per NCC table F2.3. So while Lisa's writing that up for you and you're making note of that, I'm going to move along. So that table covers all sorts of different classifications of buildings and how many sanitary facilities you may have to apply to the design. It's always good to find those sorts of things out early in the design. You want to, you know, if a client wants a warehouse that's, you know, 500 square meters, and you suddenly tell him right at the end that he needs to provide extra sanitary facilities, you're then eating into his warehouse component. So F2.4 talks about accessible sanitary facilities, and it talks about all of the different components in that. It then tells us where we need to have accessible unisex sanitary components, and we're going to have a look here. So for our class 6 or 7 building, we need to have, to comply with table F2.4a, you need 1 on every story containing sanitary compartments. Where a story has more than 1 bank of sanitary compartments containing male and female sanitary compartments, not less than 50% of those banks. So this is really talking for huge office buildings, maybe hospital buildings. And we've all been to the public toilets where, you know, there's a disabled accessible toilet in almost every area, where there's a bank of toilets for able-bodied persons. But it does mean for us that we do need to, if we provide any sanitary components on our 1 story, then we are obliged to also provide an accessible sanitary facility. But of course, that 1 accessible sanitary facility can double up as our 1 unisex that we want to provide for the office area. So you'll find in most smaller buildings, you know, where we don't have great volumes of people, if you provide at a minimum 1 unisex accessible sanitary facility, or on the other hand, if you're getting up to, our numbers are getting greater, as per that table beyond 20, we need to provide 1 male, 1 female, and then 1 unisex accessible one. That's generally where you'll have to go with that. So unisex showers, where do we need them? So in a class 6 or 7 building, where F2.3 requires 1 or more showers, not less than 1 for every 10 showers of part thereof. So really what that's telling you is, if you're starting to provide showers for able-bodied persons, then you must provide showers for your persons with accessibility issues. So
Is it required to shower? I know the urinal, but
it's not required. No, it's not required. So it's.
If you click on it, yeah. Scroll down to that table again. Yeah, where's the showers part?
Why is my table gone over to one side?
There's showers on the list.
No.
Closets, urinals, wash basins.
Oh.
Where does it say showers?
So it tells you about showers further up when you're telling you about what you need to provide in for residents. So really it's only for residential facilities.
Yeah.
But if you are providing showers for able-bodied persons, of course you can't discriminate. So you do need to provide a shower for accessibility as well. So in this instance, they've just provided one shower that is accessible in the accessible bathroom. But again, I would be making note to myself to check the dimensions of that bathroom to make sure it complies with 1428.
Just past where those, we just want to cover the sanitary compartment wall height.
Oh yeah,
Removable
okay.
doors and artificial light. I think that's the end of it. We're so close, you guys. We're just going to screech really fast through it and let you get out of here.
5:04.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
Straight down to F2.4 again. Yep. Just got a couple of last points. So one of the extra requirements is there needs to be a minimum of 1.8 height for walls between sanitary compartments. The doors need to be removable to sanitary compartments or open inwards and have a minimum of 1200 between the swing and the beginning of the closet pan, just the same as class 1 and 10 and 2. And artificial light is required everywhere. So we just want to quickly touch on those really quickly before we let you out the door, and then we're done.
F2.3, is that it?
Yeah. At 2.5, construction of sanitary compartments.
Oh yeah, below the table. Here we go.
So F2.5.
So other than in early childhood centres, the sanitary compartments must have doors that separate adjacent compartments and extend from floor level to ceiling level in the case of a unisex facility. So in other words, in a unisex facility, you can't have those gaps at the top and the bottom of your compartment. And then, and to a height of not less than 1.5 metres above the floor if in a primary school, and 1.8 metres above the floor in all other cases. So you can have them open at the top; they don't need to extend to the ceiling. So we have that situation here in the sanitary facilities here at the university. And then, of course, the door must fully enclose, but it must open outwards or slide or be readily removable from the outside of the sanitary compartment, unless there is a clear space of at least 1.2 metres between the closet pan and the sanitary compartment door. So we looked at that last week in plan, didn't we? And so if the door is opening in, there must be an extra gap between the door and the pan, the WC
God,
pan.
you'll never forget that now, will you? We've said it so often.
Yeah, yeah. Or the door must open out.
Yeah.
So just make a note of that under sanitary facilities, and I think we'll have to leave it there for today.
Is there very much left?
Quite get through everything I wanted to get through, but
We're awfully close. Oh, there's the plan as well. The room height at the bottom.
yeah.
Just here. There. Yeah, so we might have to pick it up. It's
We'll
very
just pick up. It's only going to be half an
tiny
hour.
little things, not even. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
I think we'll leave it there though. I think everybody's had